And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. Oh, what a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas room already tonight. Of course, tonight I'm joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, abracadabra. Abracadabra. It's quite a trick to turn disclosure into buffoonery, but the White House seems determined to do it, as aliens.gov got debuted this week. And guess what? It's not about those types of aliens. It's about those types of aliens, as in illegal aliens. Well, wasn't quite the rollout that they expected. There was a lot of Rotten Tomatoes thrown, and I don't blame them, really. There's been a lot of things going on in relation to this false rollout of disclosure, and it's giving me more and more the impression that the Trump administration has lost its effort to bring that UFO file back under executive control. And I'm going to get into that tonight in this very, very special episode that goes deep into alien DNA, which you've been hearing so much about, but it's the false, floaty, superficial version, unfortunately. But we're going to get into the missing scientist story and all the updates that took place and spotlight a case that there's so much evidence for, dynamic evidence related to the X series and the things we've unearthed about the case of the Pascagoula UFO mystery, which is an abduction that took place some 50 years ago, and the participants are no longer with us. But they did come forward and give us all the information that we needed. I'm going to drop a few bombshells on that one tonight, including a reference to an earlier documentary we did called The UFO File Assassins X Protect. Just watch out. This one's going to be hot stuff. I'm going to remind you now that we're going to take your questions in the second part of tonight's program, and you can ask them anytime during the rollout here. Before I jump in here, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Mike Fact 1 says, why do dark journalism forever, baby? And Ray Story says, why do aliens want our DNA?
Or is somebody trying to mix the whole batch up? And is that a cooperative effort of some sort? Is it a rumored effort? I can tell you it's interesting to hear about it being raised at all, because, of course, this is things we've raised in a number of shows. And Dr. Joseph Farrell raised in his books and in our interviews over and over again about this idea that they were using these DNA harvesting places, the 23andMe variety and all the weird scandals that we've seen with them, just like they were using originally the strange scanners when they rolled out the Patriot Act. It was to check the physiognomy, as it were, of the people going through. It had multiple purposes. If you knew that maybe there was a chance of this other thing happening, maybe you would be looking for it. Unfortunately, there was a lot of buffoonery in the talk about this. And in talking about it this week, the kind of News Nation type buffoonery that we've gotten used to in the field. But nonetheless, over and over again, we find these deeper subjects being exploited by the broader kind of false independent media. That's all right. That's all right, because we're going to give you the real thing here tonight, including the idea that all of these abduction cases, in fact, have some DNA aspects to them all the way back to the Betty and Barney Hill case. There's no question about it. And John Mack saw it as a recurring pattern over and over again. All the classics around this, Bud Hopkins and all the rest of it, they investigated that. They dug in on that. They didn't worry about whether Lou Elizondo was raising his eyebrow to suggest that maybe we were in possession of biologics and that the CIA will give you disclosure. It's actually incredibly, incredibly dangerous, as we've outlined on this program. And now the CIA is interfering in the missing scientist story. Well, that's disturbing. There's no question about that, but we're going to push them right back. I'm going to tell you tonight also about some very interesting developments going on, believe it or not, in relation to the JFK assassination case, including, as we reported on last week, the firing or the, shall we say, the letting go of Tulsi Gabbard for health reasons, family health reasons. And right before her, Amaryllis Fox Kennedy, both staggering, pioneers of disclosure, as it were. And the removal of both of them in this environment, suggesting that it was related to two things, JFK and the UFO file directly, which I think they had made some progress on. And now we're seeing that progress moved into this operation that's targeting Christians through Congress people like Eric Burleson, who is, he's an all-out UFO fanatic now. What happened to this guy? I mean, doesn't his district care about anything else than him talking about UFOs? He has a UFO podcast now.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez.
It's amazing his time for that.
It is. There's a kind of opportunism, let's face it, with these people. When they talk about their farm bills or whatever, nobody clicks their likes on Twitter. But watch out, they're getting some Twitter X attention as soon as they say there's reptoids underwater, So that's exploitation. And also somebody's whispering in their ears. Very often with Congress people, they can be naive and opportunistic. And we've had some of the worst in Congress, unfortunately, and some of the best. I mean, Ron Paul came out of Congress as well. But very interestingly, we've hit kind of a place here where all the efforts around this are getting more and more staged. So now David Grush is going to give a press event. He's going to have Jared Moskowitz and Burleson and those types of people around. And that's great. I would hope that somebody like Grush could get it. The problem is that we're stuck at the same exact place as we were in my phone call with Grush, which is now from 2 years ago. He was being controlled by Christopher Mellon, who's a DOD billionaire. He was supposed to be rolling out these 40 whistleblowers. That never happened. And it's because all of those people were under the control of Mellon. They couldn't get them all singing the same song, and that was the end of that. So you have to go up to that microphone and say, I'm not under the influence of Chris Mellon. Here's what I have to say. Because if you don't, then we're just going to assume that you're still under the influence of Chris Mellon. And Mellon is a big, big problem on the UFO file front because he's trying to launch, along with a number of others like Elizondo and others, a UFO threat operation. There's no question about it. We've laid out the facts. This is it. What they should be doing instead of grandstanding over in Congress is staging a complete investigation of the missing scientists. That's how you get to the bottom of it. And the first thing you do is take all those people that have been pushing the UFO threat operation, like Elizondo, like James Clapper and others, put them before Congress and say, why are you pushing a UFO threat, by the way? And didn't you know people like McCaslin, and weren't you trying to draw them into your UFO threat programs? General McCaslin, the general, is missing. That has not changed since February 27th. What are you doing, Congress? Grandstanding up there. You canceled your MK Ultra congressional hearing. Where are the UFO hearings? Where are the missing scientist hearings? Something very strange about all of it, in my opinion. Instead, we get aliens.gov, which isn't even about the UFO files. So this is becoming a caricature, and the buffoonery is not good because the subject itself of the UFO file takes, it's always struggled in the public imagination for people to take seriously. And it could be that they're trying to lend this buffoonery around the subject matter to try to close it off. And I've seen a lot of efforts around the missing scientists to shut that story down. And those are very, very suspicious efforts on behalf of the mainstream media. Well, that's not going to work because we launched the missing scientist story and got it all the way up to the president's desk. So do you think we're going to stop now? I doubt it. And I doubt it highly. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Woo, we've already started off hot as a flamethrower. X-Series 227 now. This is Alien DNA, the missing scientist, Pascagoula UFO mystery. I'm going to tell you that really since I was a child, I've been fascinated by the Pascagoula, Mississippi alien abduction case. And I feel for years I've captured a number of interesting and relevant facts about it. And one of the things I've been able to do is in a documentary put forward a strange factor about Litton Industries in relation to that case. Well, I found even more in relation to that. And what I'm going to do tonight is going to be interesting because one of the things I'm going to do is lay out how Ingalls Shipyard and Litton Industries could have completely done a MyLab government abduction version. And that could be exactly what we're looking at in the case. But then as I've gone deeper, I've realized, when you really look at it, there's a huge alien factor weighing in the heart of it, even after all these other pieces have come up. So what's the even stranger thing is to look at a half government, half alien operation. Something very, very strange in relation to it all. I think you're going to find it fascinating as I have. I can tell you this in terms of the kind of, feel for honesty that you get around certain people. And I never knew either one of the two people, Calvin Parker or Charles Hickson, but I was communicating with Calvin Parker about having him on the show before his illness really kicked in. And but the truth is, he gave so much testimony in the last couple of years of his life about his case, put out the book and everything else. He finally had come to terms with it after neglecting it for some 50 years because it was just too much for someone raised in that milieu, kind of religious milieu, and also this environment in Mississippi from the 1970s, or for that matter, any state. Actually, Mississippi's quite beautiful, but there's this, there's this feeling back there in the 1970s. It wasn't very easy to talk about this subject, never mind being the center point saying, yeah, I actually got abducted. There's a number of unusual things about the Pascagoula, Mississippi case. First off, the aliens involved themselves, they don't seem like any other aliens from any other case. They're not classic grays. There's no Pleiadian activity. There's no giants, whatever it is. They're just very unusual looking, gray skinned, shriveled up, no eyes, some kind of slit for a mouth, weird, like pointed things for ears. The descriptions from both of them and the fact that it's a shared abduction, just like Betty and Barney Hill, gives it, I think, this incredible heft, especially when you consider the backgrounds that, and the age difference here. We're talking Charles Hickson now was 42 years old. He had been a former Army vet, had gone through the Korean War, had seen some intense action, and it still didn't prepare him for this. And Calvin Parker was a family friend of his, in fact. It was his first day on the job, oddly enough. And Charlie had saved him as a young man.
As a child, right?
As a child. He was 5 years old and he was about to drown, and Charles had saved him. So they had this kind of interesting bond. And then Charles got him a job there at the shipyard. And when we get into these dynamics, we're going to see that it plays directly into the abduction scenario as we go along. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Debbie McAdoo says the people that are pushing the UFO threat are the same people who profit from all kinds of wars on this planet. This is just their new venture into the money opportunity, a threat from space.
Absolutely. Well, they can do no wrong with it, right? I mean, this is what they need the most, which is they need some kind of a threat. They had the Cold War threat. That's how they kept all that going. Before that, the Nazi threat. How do you build up all those armaments, create that incredible secret system of finance and all the rest? This is what the threat that they saw in Kennedy, because he wanted this whole, family of nations idea, and let's get out of this Cold War stance and arms race stance and do things jointly, like go to the moon together. And, missile testing, the anti-ballistic missile treaty, nobody could pull off things like this the way Kennedy could. And when they were looking at him, they were just thinking, oh, forget it. We'll never realize this dream of kind of war conquest and that incredible machine that we can build up with this guy around. Kennedy's tagline was, a rising tide lifts all boats. Well, they don't want that. And I think he was seen very much as a traitor to his class, because they were looking at us and thinking, whoa, average people should never have a chance to be what we are. And Kennedy was like, no, we can really equalize the situation and get rid of the scourge of war and the possibility of complete nuclear destruction and all these things. So the idealism with Kennedy, and then when you couple that with the exotic technology and some of the realizations the culture would have to go through around, the incredible discoveries we would make in relation to space, like if there were ruins on the moon or something, you can see this is a very different kind of a situation, a very different kind of a country, a very different kind of a government. So those things have to be kept in mind in terms of how we got here. Because when you look at the other end of it to 2026, you see that the militarism has largely won, if you think about it. There's the decade of terror, the terror wars, and then you had Obama who became the face of handing all the money over to the bankers. So he was basically the banker's clerk. And Trump came in on the populism and experienced incredible resistance in that first term. And they pulled the COVID op on him very quickly, and you got this complete, mind controlled Biden administration, Anthony Blinken, Kamala Harris. Some of the worst. I mean, those are some of the worst days of all time. And it's interesting because when we look at things that are going on now, Trump is in a perfect position to carry on the traditions of the populism wave that he rode in on. But unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing. The war hawks have got in his ear. They have him bombing Iran every other day. There's a false peace initiative and it falls apart, and they threaten they're going to bomb them, and then they'll bomb some more of their civilian architect. I mean, this is really, dangerous and just goes round and round. And now we're hearing that they're going to invade Cuba. Well, that's not what the United States stands for. We don't go around invading people. That's what sets us apart, in fact. So there's a lot of rethinking that will need to go on as we get into the next wave of political populism, because it's the populism that counts, not the figures. If they aren't operating, then, then that's a really big issue. But I will say that there are some initiatives around the Trump administration in terms of appearing to be transparent that can be taken advantage of by, people on the congressional side and other people trying to move this forward. Unfortunately, what you're getting instead is the CIA and the deep state invading that whole process. So when you see Lou Elizondo up there talking about the missing scientists and things of this nature, that's the reverse of what you need. When you see Peter Thiel sending out, his little errand boys in the independent media to dominate the UFO thing, that's not, this is another problem. So we're getting kind of the wrong people, maybe the right subject matter and the wrong people. And this is the nature of the problem that we're facing. It has to be corrected. And we need to point it out. It has to be a very big public debate. And I can tell you the way to get there is to really hone in and zero in on the missing scientist story. This is a story that isn't going anywhere because it represents really the battle that's going on in the background. That's the thing that needs to come forward. And a lot of people missed the boat on it around independent media. They couldn't figure it out or whatever. And then other people, because it was an organic thing, we set the fire on it and it's taken off. A lot of that, even that News Nation thing really can't pick up on it. They don't know how to do it. The Russ Coldhart type people. And they think, I can't, it's not my weird sensationalist thing over here where I launch Jake Barber and all these other weird people on a regular basis. It's the kind of whistleblowers, throw them against the wall and see if they stick. So, we just have to be clear about all this, which is there's a struggle going on about how this presents itself. And right in the heart of that struggle is Steven Spielberg this week talking about his movie that's coming out on January 12th, Disclosure Day.
And Obama and Spielberg.
Obama, that's what I was just about to say.
Mhm.
Obama showed up on the set, as it turned out. And Spielberg's like, oh, you could have heard a pin drop when that man walked in. Hey, look, I understand if Obama's your hero, Spielberg, but, certainly in terms of the UFO file, Obama didn't do anything at all, literally jack. So it is interesting to note, of course, as we have on this program, that his production company is doing the Betty and Barney Hill story. I think that's weird. I really do. And I think that Obama coming forward and saying, yeah, there are aliens, but they're not at Area 51 was also high strangeness of the most unusual caliber, because you're looking at somebody who is, as president, didn't want to talk about this issue at all, and then suddenly wants to center himself on it. So there's a battle going on in the background, but neither one wants to give the full picture. And there's a very big problem around the mainstream media and how they inform this, because they don't know very much about the UFO issue. And then the independent media doesn't get it this way. They think anything that says anything about transparency is the way to go. So if you have CIA people up there talking about the UFO file or exotic technology or psionics or whatever, that, yeah, it's good. The CIA is giving us the truth. It's not true. Counterintelligence agents are the best liars on the planet. They represent the darkest factions in the government. And those are the facts on the ground. That has to be, I've really been a lone outpost here with my super friends,
Mhm.
really calling this thing out over and over again. And I feel, and I'll do it. I will do it on a regular basis because it's the voice that needs to be heard. But the over and over again, I don't know if because they feel like they can cash in better with this or they're being pushed into it, they're influenced to do it. We know so many of the podcasts now in that larger podcast world, they have millions and millions of dollars. You wouldn't believe the money that's behind these people. I've done the investigations. So you're not really getting the truth there. So the question is, how do you get the truth? How do you make the work potent? And how do we really move things forward without ending up with a Frankenstein version of a false CIA UFO disclosure that leads to emergency powers and UFO threat and a sky event and all that kind of thing, and continuity of government. And, oh, we have to fight off those terrible aliens with a $1.2 trillion golden dome. You see, there's a lot of things that are at stake now. If we navigate that line correctly, using the truth, using a very informed sensibility that's not manipulated by Peter Thiel, that's not manipulated by Bill Gates, then we're in a totally different trajectory. What do you got?
Alchemy by Angela. They need an alien threat for continuity of government and to amass even more control over humanity. Without the threat, they can't see their agendas to fruition. Digital control grid, UBI, etc.
Oh, no question. How can they really do it? There are $40 trillion in debt in America alone right now. And they want to spend, all kinds of more money on this military expeditions, this expeditionary expansionist policy. It just doesn't make any sense. But it makes sense. You have people on the technocratic side, the techno bros and others saying, you're going to get your own personal robot and all that. Things you don't need. You do not need a personal robot. I can tell you that. Hey, just put this chip in your brain and you'll have the internet. You won't need a cable company. That's the next step. And you have to have a red line, and that red line should be your body, your physical electromagnetic organism. Very simple. And they're already invading closer and closer and squeezing harder and harder, right? So somewhere you experience the pushback. And just like with the COVID op, there was a resistance point that got hit and you could feel the op kind of fold. And with this stuff, they've invested so much in those AI data centers and this totally dystopian future for us that I can tell you, the main thing is not to accept the false promise of things like UBI and all this kind of nonsense. If Elon wants to give UBI to people, if in the future money's not going to mean anything, great. Just sign over your money right now. You can sign it over to Dark Journalist and I'll distribute it for you. I'm happy to do it for you. Hey, Elon comes up tonight.
Okay.
And it's a huge discovery. And I'm going to tell you this very strange. Back, as I was studying Litton Industries, I found an association of Daniel Fry, who's a very early contactee story, who brought in the weird Atlantis Lemuria part with the UFO file all the way back in the 50s. And quite interesting. He was around. He was a kind of a very sensible voice, but he was around that whole contactee movement with Adamski and George Hunt Williamson, all those guys. And that's him there with Adamski, in
What a great
fact.
shot.
But here's what's very interesting. And I think that people have missed this for years. I always thought it was weird when they said that the Lemurian pilot of this spaceship that he got aboard and had this incredible encounter over, they always said the guy's name was Alan. And I was like, well, kind of a weird name for a Lemurian. And how, Alan's a great name, but, Alan, seemed weird for an alien. But that wasn't the story. Apparently, that wasn't the name at all. The name was A dash. He was using a phonetic spelling, LAWN. What does that sound like?
Lawn.
Alon.
Oh, okay.
Same name, same exact name. Very strange. I'm going to read this actually. So, and this will start us off. We'll move from here, from the 1950s directly to Pascagoula, and then we'll bring that up to date with our missing scientists update, if that sounds good. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 227. Now, this is alien DNA, the missing scientists, and the Pascagoula UFO mystery revealed. We're going to take your questions in the second half of tonight's program, and we'll go a couple hours with you here on this very interesting last weekend of May. Really kind of, quite a lot up in the air as we hit into a June disclosure push coming in. All right, July 4th, 1949 at White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico, which is the star of many, many UFO encounters. Daniel Fry was employed there. Now, what I found out about him is that he had worked for Litton Industries. That I found interesting. I knew he had worked for Aerojet, which is the same place that had, Jack Parsons and others of that nature had worked. And it was around the same period of time, around the Parsons period that he was working there. So,
so we have at least 3 abductees working for Litton that we know of.
Well, that's a good point, because the other two, I'm going to get to that,
Okay.
how the Pascagoula guys are working for Ingersoll and that whole thing that comes up, or Ingalls Shipbuilding, and that's the shipyard that's owned. And there's a very mysterious character, an assassin, who's also working there. Fry had planned to join the Independence Day festivities that evening in nearby Las Cruces, but he missed the last bus. Finding the temperature in his room uncomfortably hot, he decided to take a walk in the desert. And what he claims he saw an oblate spheroid that landed in front of him. He talked remotely with the pilot who operated the craft from a mothership 900 miles above the Earth, supposedly. Okay. So this is a really kind of far out heavy story, and yet it goes into interesting places. The other thing I want to mention about Fry is he had a long history of working with very high-end projects dealing with aerospace, and he worked with explosives and things. I mean, this is not somebody who is, toking up on a mountainside and seeing a UFO. He was somebody who had a number of people underneath him for these defense contractors. Now, during the flight and subsequent meetings, Fry asserted that he talked with the pilot named Alan, which he pronounced A-A-A-long. Elon. Sounds like Elon to me. Who gave information on physics and the prehistory of Earth, including Atlantis and Lemuria, the foundations of civilization. And you get this whole thing about Mount Shasta coming back in this case, which is all these spaceships are going into Mount Shasta. That's where the Lemurians went and all the rest of it. Now, there's a real case to be made about ancient cultures having access to advanced technologies. And we have that through the Mystery School track. And I'm going to read some of that tonight as well, including the Ezekiel aspect as leftover Atlantean technology. And then where does it go? Where do we go now, right? We have to think of these things and really expand how we see what we're looking at on the table, because you've had so much skeptic nonsense, and then you've had this big push for just ET stuff. And somewhere in the middle of all this, we're going to get to the real answer, including things that are obvious fabrications by the government, probably to discredit the subject as well. Shortly after Fry went public with his story, so they go into this whole thing, and then there's all this stuff where they try to discredit him later. And yet everything that I've looked at of his is just theosophy tinged backgrounds, very Mystery School oriented, like our friend Adamski. And I will say this, that in my opinion, his background in aeronautics gives him a different take on all this. So in other words, when you deal with some of these people, one of the guys, main figures in all of this, who built the Integratron and everything else, he worked for Howard Hughes and was Hughes' main pilot for 10 years. And Hughes was one of the greatest pilots of all time. And then Hughes would come in, to his little mountain retreat, and they built a landing pad for Hughes. So you've got Hughes Aerospace in the heart of all this. You've got Litton Industries, who become the leading aerospace companies. and then in the heart of all that, you have Ling Temco Vout. And Ling Temco Vout becomes one of the leading experimental aerospace companies in the world. And all of their main people seem to be associated around the JFK assassination. So you have to understand that the way that I look at these things, and I've repeated it on this show, and I'm happy to really reiterate it here for people who may be new that are listening, that the aerospace companies enjoy, and the defense contractors, a much bigger role in the power system. Often you hear people talk about bankers and central banking and all that kind of stuff, and there's no question about it. But the aerospace aspect is the outgrowth of the pattern of power, and you can't exercise that power without the complete control of that aerospace faction, because all the power that you have on the ground depends on what you have up there in lower Earth orbit and your orbital stations and all the rest of it. You can't forget that the original secret space program came out of the Nazi belief that they could have these circling space stations sort of, watching the globe, and anything that went on the ground they could control from space. So, that's the kind of Valhalla in the early version of the Nazi mythology. And what you have to see is that they were thinking of the rocket thing as a means of that power. That was Thor's, lightning bolts. And so they were mixing the mythology with the reality. That's the way it was going. But when it came down to an actual plan, their plan were for powerful, powerful space stations to control everything on the ground from space. And that's exactly what you're getting. And you're getting all kinds of good excuses for it. Just like in the 1980s, they had great excuses for Star Wars and SDI. And I don't even think that President Reagan was, he wasn't being opportunistic about it. He really thought that we were facing a threat, because they were taking all the images and things. They weren't showing him fake stuff. They were showing him the real stuff. And it does, it would be very, very unnerving to look at these craft doing all these maneuvers. Not like the phony stuff that we get in these UFO dumps where it's like, look at that dot, it's going so fast. The first two UFO file dumps, with they talk about the tranche of documents, actually, a lot of the stuff has already been released. So unless they decide to do something else, forget it. This has been largely disappointing, as I said, a lot of grandstanding. Oh, by the way, just to finish off the thing with Fry, this was one of the craft that he said that was operating there. That's his picture of it. And, some people say, well, it's a fake or whatever, maybe. But then again, I think with his background, it doesn't strike me as something where he's just going to forget all about his regular career in, having this massive aerospace background and then just get rid of it all to just become a UFO hero. Something happened to him in White Sands. Was it a government operation? That could be as well. Now, that's going to also play in directly to what we get to with the Pascagoula case. I have some news updates. What I'm going to do a little bit in reverse this time, I'm going to work the news updates into the question and answer period, because I want to get right into the Pascagoula abduction case while we're on the prime time side, because time keeps on slipping. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. I want to remind you, especially if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. It is a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch through this massive wave of really heavy-duty censorship that we witness on this channel. And, a lot of that has to do with the way that algorithms and things play out when they try to keep certain information back. But what I will say is that, oddly enough, they've had to adjust some of what they do because of all the AI explanations. Those things haven't learned how to censor dark journalists yet. So Google's like, oh no, AI is actually reporting the real thing about the incredible, groundbreaking work that we do on this program. So there's been a weird, thing where you can feel that some of that ice breaking. And I think also our appearances on the Alex Jones show, and Alex, his own kind of brave stance in relation to the UFO file and really getting the truth out there about that, cutting through so much of the censorship. And really what's interesting is, and I've been listening to him for years, of course, and this goes right along with everything he's done. He's always been ahead of the curve. And, people have asked me when's the next time I'm going to be on, Alex, because we've been doing it so frequently. And all I can say is soon indeed. And I'm looking forward to it. All right. So I promised you an ancient aspect to this before we get anywhere else. We're going to go into the readings of the Sleeping Prophet, Edgar Cayce, very briefly here to get some background on how the advanced technology, the advanced craft stuff could be inherited through a passed down tradition of advanced technology. Now, I've shown different books with stories from India and all the rest of it where they talk about the fact of how they need to keep the aerospace stuff secret. And some of those books are, 12th century, 13th century. Cayce did something really remarkable, which is he filled out a story of Atlantis through his readings, this whole retro cognitive vision that he had. And he did it, although the Theosophical Society and Steiner's anthroposophy had painted this backdrop of Atlantis and Ignatius Donnelly and all these different things that had come up. Really not until Cayce do we get the precise aspect of just how advanced that culture was and how it was that they were spiritually advanced, and that took on the advancement through the technology. And it was when that went out the window that the whole thing went down and became such a destruction. The gods had to get rid of it. The gods of nature, as it were. Cayce gave over 900 life readings, and most of them include lives in Atlantis for the different people who came to him. It's a reincarnation concept embedded in mystery school work. And one of the ways that he was able to get so much of the information around what these people had experienced was to tap into their subconscious mind for the lives that they had lived there. And so he would be reading also this thing called the Akashic Record. And the Akashic Record is an Eastern concept about every thought and deed being recorded, in that when you reach a certain point of attunement, you can actually tune in and see exactly every aspect of everything that has ever taken place. And it's very interesting if you go back for the people who study both Steiner and Cayce, which I'm one. They asked Cayce about Steiner. They were like, and first of all, he had said all these very, very interesting things about Ouspensky and how Ouspensky was this incredible mystic and was the keeper of the records in the mountain in a previous lifetime. And he went off, talking about this Russian philosopher Ouspensky, and he said, we find that he was born on the 7th day, 7th month, 7th hour, 7th year, 777. And, for a while they couldn't get Cayce out of this thing that he was in. So whatever he was doing, tuning into Ouspensky, you can tell Ouspensky was a very high mystic. And with Steiner, they had asked him, is his cosmic memory, Atlantis and Lemuria visions in that book true? And, Cayce was very clear. He said, yeah, it is correct. And, there's a vision there when these people are looking at the same thing. They reach a certain point of mystical attainment where they can read the Akashic records. And they might see things certainly differently. And over the years, I've had people come to me and say, like, why does so-and-so say this is 5,000 BC and these other people say it's 10,000 BC? It literally, I think, just like in regular life, you're going to have opinions about things. But I think by and large, when they're looking at the Akashic records, they're going to agree about the key points. And you're going to see, though, everything goes through a human lens. And so the person's opinion, their personality is a factor in everything they look at. Cayce could go into these visions, and of course, he was famous for his incredible health readings. We did our most recent documentary, Pyramid X, which is all about the Hall of Records and discoveries that are going on over at Giza using the space radar. And it goes all into the Casey story and his entire background, which I think becomes more and more important as we come into this period. And I think much of the mystery school activity from Blavatsky, from Gurdjieff, from Steiner and Casey is all to set up the 21st century. And if you really go between the lines, you're going to find them giving people the tools so that they could give their children and grandchildren the tools and great grandchildren for this period that we're in. That's the, kind of scary part in a way, because we're going to need them. All right. Here's what Casey gives us some hints here about the ancient technology. He says, before that, we find the entity was in the Atlantean land during those periods, particularly when there was the exodus from Atlantis, owing to the foretelling of those activities which were bringing about the destructive forces, the predictions. They're going in the wrong direction. They're going to take the island down. The Belial group is misusing the two-eye stone, and the Amelius group needs to flee. Amelius group being a super spiritual group. There we find the entity was among those who were not only in what is now known as the Yucatan land, but also in the Pyrenees and the Egyptian. So, we have this kind of French Spain part of the egress of the Atlanteans. And it's very interesting when you get to the Basque, some of the more unexplained cultures over there. In the case of the Basques, they have their own language. And we've done some episodes on them. We should probably do more, actually, when you come right down to it. So then he said, as we find the entity was among those who were not only in what is now known as the Yucatan land, but also in the Pyrenees and the Egyptian. So during the destruction, the really advanced initiates were taking their people into Egypt, into the Mayan land, into all these different places to start these different cultures. And he says, for the manners of transportation, the manners of communications through the airships of that period were such as Ezekiel described at a much later date. Leaving it right in midair. Ezekiel describes the wheel within a wheel, the whirlpool, these incredible machines, the voice, it seems like the voice of God coming out of them and all the rest of it. And I'm sure that Ezekiel, as you can see in the other Casey readings, he has a very holy communion with the saintly realm. But nonetheless, here is Casey describing a technology coming from the Atlantean period, an airship technology that Ezekiel is using 1500 BC. And the Atlanteans all go down in 10,500 BC. So we have this 9,000 year period where somebody keeps the technology. Somebody has it. That may open up a lot of what we're talking about in terms of the UFO file now. Here's a little more in Atlantis, and then we're going to move into our Pascagoula abduction experience. Describe in more detail the causes and effects of the destruction of the part of Atlantis that is now the Sargasso Sea. As there were individuals that attempted to bring again to the mind of man more of those forces that are manifested by the closer association of mental, spiritual, soul forces, there were more and more as individual and personal forms in the world, the use of those elements as for the building up, the passage of individuals through space. So he's giving a hint here that, they're mastering the elements as they're becoming more and more material. They're starting to incorporate their incredible Atlantean genius into this. And he says, this brought the uses of the gases in the existent forces and the individuals being able to become the elements and elementals themselves. Well, that's something that is even beyond what we can imagine. Can you imagine, you're in the physical person and then you into this whole other elemental experience. So he's giving us, I think, a big key there about what was going on in that Atlantean period. And he says that the elementals themselves added to that used in the form of what is at present known as the raising of the powers from the sun itself to the ray that makes for the disintegration of the atom in the gaseous forces formed and brought about the destruction of that portion of the land now presented or represented or called the Sargasso Sea. So a lot of that thick Sargasso Sea, it's known to be this incredibly muddy and hard to pass terrain, that's part of the Atlantean destruction. And trust me, there's more here I could go into about Atlantis, thought bodies, and all the rest of it, but we'll save that for another show. But you get the hint here that he's talking about the high level of achievement and how they didn't have the separation of the intellect with what they were doing. So he goes straight from this pure intuitive sense and know how to create the technology, know how to use it. They would become masters. And it's quite interesting. Casey tells us that during that period around the 1930s and 40s, where you get World War II and all these incredible changes in history, that it's the Atlanteans coming back, reincarnating back. And that what we're looking at in the 21st century is another setup against that backdrop. So keep that in mind as we talk about advanced technology tonight. Now we go to Pascagoula, Mississippi. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, deep, deep tonight into the heart of the mystery of the UFO file in ancient history. We're also going to be taking your questions in the second half tonight. Miss Olivia, before I go any further, what do you got?
SV Harkin says Litton Industries pioneered jamming technologies, radio and microwave, which is a core strategy of space warfare. And David Donaway says Litton Industries does not exist as an independent entity in the Space Force era. A former major defense and aerospace contractor, Litton was acquired by Northrop Grumman in 2001.
Oh, yeah, much, much later. But we're talking about the 1950s and 60s. They owned something like 80 different companies. I mean, yeah, they were the powerhouse. And they got sucked up by Northrop Grumman because, remember, these are like mafias. And they just absorb each other at a certain point. There's no hostility with it. It's just like,
Consolidation is the name of the game.
You take my Gambino daughter and you marry her. And, so this is the nature of defense contractors. There is a fraternity going on in the background. All right, I'm going to show you something. And when all the things that I show you, you're going to think that I'm telling you straight up that the case of the Pascagoula abductees was a MILAB of some sort, because Litton Industries, I've discovered, was involved right in that environment they were in. So it might seem that way, but I'm going to tell you the story becomes more and more alien, in fact. But let's start it off this course. First off, this is 1958. Okay, this is Litton Industries and what they were pumping out, getting ready for the big space program in 1958. And you've got the man in the big suit with the big hands and the incredible, kind of aluminum and the developments here. They would eventually develop the Apollo mission outfits, but these are the early versions. If you take a real good look at them, they're going to come in handy when I show you some of the other things we have coming up. But take a good look at those uniforms. And what is also interesting is they seem to have something like that memory metal that we've been talking about in relation to Roswell and the missing scientists. And I will include that factor. But here's a look at them with some of this crazy, metal that would not burn, etc., and the things that are going on there. Now, Litton Industries, you've got a guy named Charles Tex Thornton running them, and he had worked for Howard Hughes and then moved into what looked like it was going to be sort of chemical plants and things like that. Somehow it gets jettisoned into this space stuff, and that might have to do with his association with Hughes Aerospace, but it's odd in any case. But one of the big items that they have is that they decide they're going to buy Ingalls Shipyard. And there's a couple of things on the background I'm going to read about Litton, and then we'll get into more of the kind of way they dominated the electronics industry. Now, Charles Thornton stands out as a wonder. He was an Air Force colonel at 28. That's got to be almost a record. That seems incredibly rare to me. The planning director for Ford Motor Company at 32. This guy is a mover and a shaker. operating boss of Hughes Aircraft at 35. So you got Ford, Hughes, and the Air Force behind this. And by 45, he heads one of the fastest growing electronic makers. Now, this article's from 1960. Beverly Hills Litton Industries. Here's another piece I want to point out about Litton, which is their headquarters is not Washington, D.C. Their headquarters is not California. The headquarters is not the city of industry. Their headquarters is Beverly Hills. That's also very strange for a defense contractor. And there's a very little known fact about our friend Tex Thornton here, who's running Litton, which is that he loves to buy up all this Hollywood memorabilia about the Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
And he buys all of the little trinkets and all the little things they wore and the costumes and all the rest of it. So, you know, he wants to buy the Scarecrow's hat. He wants to buy Dorothy's dress. He wants to buy the Tin Man's outfit. You know, this is what they're doing with their money back there. And also, very unusually, he buys the stairway from Gone with the Wind, installs it in his house, and the shoes of Shirley Temple put on this kind of, you know, mantle worship spot in the heart of his living room. This guy worships Hollywood. And when you think about some of the chicanery that'll show up later in terms of rumors that the same guy who shoots 2001: A Space Odyssey is also shooting some fake moon footage, then this aerospace Hollywood piece becomes, you know, the foundation of it. You have to look to Litton.
Odyssey.
Yes, Space Odyssey indeed. Space Odyssey 2001. Litton products have already gone far around the free world. Am I sitting in a tin can? In Turkey, a probing Litton radar antenna reportedly keeps tabs on Soviet missile firing. Across the far north of Canada and Alaska, Litton klystron tubes generate radar beams for distant early warning line. This is a very interesting thing. And the klystron comes directly out of the Varian brothers. If you watch this show, you know, there's a huge overlay from the X technology and how it grows out to the public and the development of the klystron. Litton products have already gone far around the world. In Turkey, right. So Litton claims to be the nation's biggest seller of desk calculating machines, TV transformers. And Tex Thornton, who was born in Knox County, Texas, graduated from Texas Technological College, got a backhanded boost towards success from the eccentric, erratic Howard Hughes. No stranger to the UFO file. We put on the record here many, many a time. And we have this whole thing in the background about he's gobbling up all these companies. And it's a Time magazine article that's starting to say this guy is the mover and the shaker of the period of time, and like we're celebrating him. They're really getting behind him and saying he's the one who's really going to make the difference. Now, it's interesting to me because later, Litton Industries will be kind of one of the #1 companies in trouble with the government for overbilling, for fraud, for polluting. As a matter of fact, there's a story from Missouri that the company that bought them out had to pay all of these fees because they had been poisoning people through pollution and polluting the rivers and all this other stuff for 40 years and nobody knew it. So Litton was a very dicey group. And here we have an article. Now, this is from 1994. And so, yeah, they get Northrop Grumman to pay after the fact. Defense giant Litton pleads guilty to fraud. California-based defense contracting giant Litton Industries pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges, agreeing to pay $4 million in fines, civil claims, and prosecution costs arising from a 1988 procurement scandal. Plea deal, 7.5-year Justice Department case, and all the rest of it. This was going on nonstop with our friends at Litton. They were just being run by criminals, and it was the kind of Enron-style criminals, the white-collar variety. But, you know, they had plenty of money and time to make great architects make buildings like this for them. Check that one out, Miss Olivia.
Cool.
It's binoculars.
It's amazing.
Very interesting and very unusual. One of the things that they were doing in the background was medical research and the production of viruses. And they were working on rocket propulsion, and they were working on nuclear energy, and they were working on nuclear carriers, nuclear submarines. So we're talking about a company deep, deep in the kind of defense contracting environment, highly secret, black budget, black projects galore. Now, one of the things, again, I want to point out about them is they were early pioneers in the spacesuits. Take a look here again, more of their spacesuit action, and a little more about Litton. Diversified U.S. multinational corporation, founded in 1953 by Charles Tex Thornton. Okay, more than 80 divisions provided products and services ranging from electronic and electrical components, headquartered in Beverly Hills. Among Litton's popularly known brand names is Litton microwave ovens, Royal and Triumph typewriters. It's a major defense contractor. I saw they got into food, and you'll never guess what the label of food was.
What?
Stofers.
Wow.
So was that like really big in the 70s and 80s? If you go back, you're going to see Stofers everywhere. I'm sure
I think they still make them.
they still make them, yeah. When chartered in November 1953, the company was named Electrodynamics Corporation. In 1954, Thornton acquired Litton Industries, an electron tube manufacturer in San Carlos, California. Originally founded in 1932, he moved the headquarters to Beverly Hills. Over the years, there were dozens of further acquisitions, such as Ingalls Shipbuilding Company. Now, there's a very famous assassin who has this weird period just before he goes on this assassination craze. He goes to Hollywood, and he has no less than 10 psychologists that he's working with on this power of positive thinking mindset. And he's developed this whole new character, gives himself a whole new name, and all the rest of it. But one of the things that he's doing is he's saying to prospective employers, and he's saying to, his landlady, and he's saying to anyone who'll listen, that he works for Litton Industries and that he just came from Ingalls Shipbuilding. That's his backstory. And one of the things that they find when they identify him as the Martin Luther King assassin, this is James Earl Ray, of course, is they find all these calls that he made while in Los Angeles to Beverly Hills Department, right there, Litton Industries, the very heart of their headquarters. He's making calls on a regular basis to Beverly Hills Litton Industries.
What do you make of that?
I think they're responsible for his gigantic psychological makeover. And one of the points that I made in the documentary originally around X-Protect is that all of these guys in history that they portrayed as the patsy, the lone gunman who really put out there, they all had a UFO connection, a huge one. Oswald, of course, with Bannister, who started the UFO file. And of course, with James Earl Ray, his connection to Litton Industry, I'm going to show you the connection to the UFO file. But also in the Robert Kennedy assassination case, we had our friend doing the actual shooting, not Sirhan, but Thane Eugene Caesar. And he had just got the job at the Ambassador Hotel 3 days earlier. Well, very interesting, Thane came out of Skunk Works, the most elite division of redevelopment. And he worked security at Skunk Works. And he, people who study the case know that he's actually the person who's doing the shooting there at the Ambassador that night. So there's a weird, in that row of 60s assassinations, the UFO file looms, the aerospace aspect looms large. Yeah, what do you got?
David Tormina, DJ. Turns out George de Mornschild's wife, another one of these white Russians, not only worked with Zapruder, but she testified that her brother was doing secret work for Howard Hughes, the U.S. government, Litton Industries, TRW, and North American.
Now, see, that's fascinating because when you bump up against, when you get into De Mornschild, you're dealing with, he's the oil geologist who shepherded, this millionaire shepherding this $1.25 an hour Oswald, who's working in the book depository, and all the people around De Mornschild. But that bit about Zapruder, I remember that. Litton is very interesting, though. And so that opens up, I think, even more as we get into it. I think that Litton is a direct link into that deep state aspect of the UFO file operating. And it's hard to find them, not Litton, but it's hard to find these companies that are active on this black budget, black project side, because they have so many fronts for different things. They had tax shelters. They had so many, bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and all the rest of it. But I think the purchase of Ingalls and then the follow-up aspect of the incredible Pascagoula story gives us maybe a real hint, a real bird's eye of what was going on there. And like I said, it's going to sound like they staged the whole thing before the evening is over. However, I'm going to tell you right now, spoil the ending. The case is actually more alien, reads more alien, and it could read human alien partnership too as we get into it.
All right.
Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 227. It's Alien DNA, the missing scientists, Pascagoula UFO mystery, and Litton Industries, very strange, shadowy organization operating in the heart of it under the shadow of Hughes Aerospace. We're going to be taking your questions here, I would say within the next 20 minutes or so. But I'm going to dive into the rest of the Pascagoula case. Before I do, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
David followed up and said that's straight out of her testimony to the Warren Commission.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it's also weird whenever you get around TRW on the on the Kennedy side. All right. A couple of honest guys here had an extraordinary experience. So, you've got Calvin Parker, a 19-year-old, and kind of a no-nonsense guy, a tough guy. And you have a family friend of his working in a shipyard. And it is the Smith shipyard, or it's actually F. Rogers. And that is part of Ingalls. And what's interesting is that Hickson, Charles Hickson, has almost kind of a spiritual aspect to him. And sometimes people have gone through wars and seen a lot, have this aspect to him. But in interviews and things, I've had that experience of really tuning in to the fact that he has this going on. What happened to them is he gets him a job at the same shipyard that he's at to run welding and do all this stuff. And he's worked there for 5 years and has a terrific track record. They love him. And he gets Calvin the job. And the very first day he gets Calvin the job, Calvin's getting training and all the rest of it. And at the end of the day, it's very odd, but Charles Hickson's like, let's go fishing. It's this great spot to fish over by this abandoned shipyard that's close by. It's actually part of this whole construction here on the other side of the bridge. And Calvin Parker says, no, I'm not really into it. I don't want to do it. But Charlie talks him into it. This is day one of his job. And if you think about it, what goes on there with him going there kind of reluctantly and Charlie getting him the job and everything else, Charlie becomes the conduit for Calvin having this incredible experience of alien abduction. And they've shared a lot, through life, as I mentioned, and his son, Charlie's son, is very close with Calvin. So what happens is they're on the river there fishing, having a very normal time of it. And they get approached by a craft. They see something in the background. They see these blue lights going off and they think, oh, this is the police. And they're busting us because there's all these no trespassing and don't fish here signs. And they're doing it anyway. But they turn around and there's this incredible light and all these APOTHEUM effects start to take place. They feel lighter than air, all kinds of things. And they see the ship that's hovering and they say it's about 30 feet in diameter. And it's hovering off the ground about 1.5 feet. and then these beings come out of it. And the beings that come out of it aren't like friendly scientific grays that are coming to examine you. These are very freaky looking, kind of monstrous creatures. That's their best portrayal of what they saw. And if you saw that, you know, these creatures coming forward, it's like out of a sci-fi monster movie. So these are not typically anything like what you would say a traditional experience had. Think of Betty and Barney Hill's Junior, you know, and Junior's giving them all these instructions about the universe and the expeditions that they do. These guys don't say anything. They just show up and grab them, and they have kind of claws for hands. So they, you know, the artistic renditions were done over and over again, and they always come back to this one central type character. There's 3 of the characters, but they're about 5 feet tall, and they have this gray, wrinkled type skin, like they've been underwater. Not much for features, and just these kind of like weird pointy things out of their ears. They don't make any indications. They don't do anything except grab them and take them and float them into the ship. So we're getting floating right away. You're into apotheum immediately. Later on, when they leave the craft, they go back to the car and the windows are shattered. So, you know, they go to put the keys out, and the car is magnetized. It grabs the keys. You know, all kinds of weird things. The car won't start.
All of the windows are shattered?
On one side, the side facing the craft.
Wow.
Yeah. Think about that. There's some very odd apotheum piece in it that I'm going to get to here. But so one of the things that takes place is that, you know, they have an experience where they're taken aboard the craft, and everything came out immediately after the experience. You know, they called Kessler Air Force Base. Kessler said, "We don't investigate UFOs. Call the sheriff." They do that. They take a lie detector test. They tape them secretly. All these things happen, and they're all convinced that they've had this experience. And I think anybody listening to them would be convinced, because, you know, you can just tell that these people have gone through something extraordinary. Later, even within a couple of years, and then 15 years later, and other people would take them into deeper and deeper trance levels to find out exactly what had taken place. And Charlie in particular wanted to know, while our friend Calvin Parker had great difficulties with it, had a nervous breakdown, and went into you know, an asylum for a while. And he went into a mental facility for a while. He came out and he recovered his life in all of it. But what I will say about Charlie is he wanted to get to the bottom of what had taken place. But essentially what takes place is they bring them in, they examine them, Betty and Barney Hill style, you know, and this thing comes out of the wall and it looks like an eye, and it goes over their whole body. Now, this also takes place if you are familiar with the Allagash incident. So you have these big creatures doing these examinations, but this thing comes out and it's like an eye, and it goes over them. So same technology, different monster, right? And it's quite interesting because after a while, you know, they start to get this impression that they're getting something is being put in them, like fluid or a tracker, an implant of some kind. And these different things take place, and they're terrified. And this is a guy who's a Korean War vet, but he's still terrified of what's taking place here. And you can imagine any of us would be. Now, I want to mention this. The whole reason this whole crisscross came up is because, you know, I'm such a JFK assassination buff that in my documentaries and things around JFK, I was reading these different sections from William Turner, who's an FBI agent who studied the Oswald connection and all the rest of it. Here's a few interesting things. FBI agent William Turner found a potentially important lead missed by the FBI. He had an investigator physically go to James Earl Ray's second residence, the low-rent hotel with a telephone booth in the lobby. The investigator photographed the inside of the telephone booth. That photograph showed a brief note, apparently in Ray's handwriting, which listed only a name and telephone number. The number turned out to be a direct line to the manager at Litton Industries in Beverly Hills. Certainly not a common number to be dialed from the payphone in the lobby of a cheap hotel. Turner noted that Litton Industries operated a shipyard in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And this is so fascinating because the deep state researchers have no interest in the UFO file, as I've pointed out before. And the UFO researchers have never been deep enough on the deep state side. But you can see what happens when you hybridize those two different lines of information. You get this incredible, stunning breakthrough in the heart of it, which is James Earl Ray is connected with Litton Industries, which owns the shipyard that the two people get abducted in. You have to, it's that type of chemistry that's going to get you somewhere in this line of research. And it is the bifurcation of those two that has kept both subjects missing a vital element on the other side. In the case of the UFO file, now the CIA has come in and run all these mind jobs on people about false disclosure. And on the deep state side, they know all about government atrocities. They know all about the overreach of government and all the rest of it. But they've been totally allergic to the UFO file because, it's had so many bizarre twists and turns and characters that they're just like, oh, you guys don't do any research, forget it. So there needs to be, this is kind of just a little commentary in the heart of this, there needs to be some acknowledgement of those two deep fields, the research methods on both sides, because it's the deep state researchers who are impeccable, who are not, the circus is in town, Corbell, Elizondo CIA joke show. Totally different. They understand, and they've written their whole lives tracking different things that the government has done, from arms running to drug dealing to overthrow of other governments to suppression of and surveillance of their own citizens. They get all that. The UFO people, on the research side, there's nothing there. It's like, there's no depth. And what they want is something to go further and further out, and they don't care if they're losing the groundedness of the facts on the ground. So, but that's a crucial little thing, and it comes directly from this William Turner character, who is one of the, was one of the best in terms of tracking the government on that. Now, one of the things that takes place in all of this with Calvin Parker and our friend is they both go into this weird vision state when they're in the craft. And basically, the aliens who are behind glass, they don't get to see. They only get to see these kind of weird robot monster creatures, are giving them information. And the information is, terrible things will happen to the environment. Terrible things will happen to the world if humanity doesn't get its act together, and this kind of thing. So they both kind of remember that. And there seems to be a tinge of almost religious imagery that's mixed in. After the examinations, and I'll mention some things that happened to them after the fact, but after they're dumped off, basically, again, they're in this kind of terrified state, and they get dropped off, and Charlie's so freaked out that he can't get up. And when he looks up at Calvin, Calvin has his arms out in front of him, like the guy sleepwalking towards the river, off in a daze. And he, according to Charlie, it takes 15 minutes for him to shake Calvin out of it. Now, then they go back to the car. The windows are blown out, like I mentioned, and the car is magnetized. They can't get it to start. It does about 15 minutes later. The craft is taken off and all the rest of it. Oddly enough, over the years, a number of different people have come forward to say, yeah, actually, I did see a craft over by that shipyard when this happened. And in this case, the story is very true. That's what has bothered me for 45 years. UFO Witnesses Speak. It's a story that's fascinated people for decades. Two Pascagoula men claim they were abducted by aliens while fishing in the Pascagoula River, as was expected by the two men, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. Their story was often met with skepticism and ridicule. But it turns out that overall now there's 7 different witnesses And a couple of those witnesses actually saw the craft interacting with them, and it was these beings grabbing them. So the story became more and more solidified.
Did it occur to anybody to call the cops or anything?
I know. Well, they wonondered what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say this, both Charlie and Calvin were very practical about this. If there was like a down-to-earth answer, they were like, maybe the military is doing an experiment. And Calvin said, I know that there were military experiments in that area because, the military operated there. So, they were practical about it. But Charlie was completely convinced that this was an extraterrestrial group that had come here. And in fact, if you go into it deeper, you're going to find that both of them have ongoing abduction scenarios involving the very same beings. And then later, and I mean much later in their lives, they'll do hypnotic regressions, and we're going to find in their childhood they had interactions with the beings. This is a lifelong.
Both of them?
Both of them.
Mm.
Yeah, incredible. Okay, a little more strange detail. So there's a report back there from, this took place October 11th, 1973. And there was a whole kind of worldwide reaction to it. The story was gigantic. Somehow the story ricocheted everywhere. And they had to leave their jobs. And in many cases, it caused a lot of personal complications for them, et cetera. But one of the things that came up from a UFO researcher back in the day named Leonard Stringfield, who was quite good. And he notes, quote, the Spruance, which was a nuclear-powered submarine, was being built at the Ingalls shipyard, and there are other shipbuilding facilities in the Pascagoula area, including a large nuclear facility operated by Litton Industries in the U.S. Navy. So here we have these aliens. They do love to be around the nuclear technology aspects, but here they are around a facility run directly by Litton. Keep that in mind as we go along here. What do you got, Miss Olivia?
This is great. Esoterics 369 says, Betty Hill, true story, told my friend to go to the Merrimack River in Methuen, Mass.
Oh, wow.
And you will see UFOs come out of the water. Sure as heck, it happened.
Wow. Well, there's a very interesting follow-up with Betty Hill's work, which was called A Common Sense Approach to UFOs. It was all about these groups of people who got together in New Hampshire because she lived in Portsmouth. And they would get together, and they knew that the UFOs came out of lakes and rivers. And she said, they would kind of meet up as groups, and there'd be all the 20 cars along the riverway, and they'd all wait, and the UFOs would come out and do a whole show for them. So there's a gigantic thing going on up there in New Hampshire in relation to this. Yeah.
Sorry, I just made a connection. I'm going to jump to the
end. Sure.
Going. So the data centers, and they're eating up all of our water.
Oh.
And we know that UFOs have been seen sucking up water.
True.
So if they are us humans in the future who have time traveled back, not just for human DNA, but for water, for pure water.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. I'm just thinking out loud.
Wow. It's very interesting. Let's take a pulse here. Let's see what the ideas room thinks. Do you in the ideas room think that this, which is the creature that they saw when they were abducted and that grabbed them and dragged them into the ship and didn't say anything, these types of creatures, do you think that there's anything sort of resembling what we're looking at here? If you think of these as the 1950s outfits of the same group, so if we're looking 15 years later, do you think it's pretty reasonable to assume, well, you know what, the same people, Litton Industries, who made these outfits could easily have made these outfits and have come up with this whole, some of the crossover looks wise are quite remarkable, in fact. But what I find even more interesting than that is that the sense that the beings don't move around. Their necks don't turn. They're very stiff. So they're moving around in these very kind of stiff fashion. And Charlie in particular notes that they don't, when they turn their body, the whole thing moves. Like it's almost like a person in an outfit.
Right.
Yes.
That lends itself more to the idea that it is a costume, that it is.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because why would a creature evolve to?
It's like the classic Bigfoot film.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Like because you can move around and all the rest of it. Absolutely. What's interesting to me when looking at this case is that a lot of what takes place, again, is not like the traditional UFO encounter. Not that there ever should be, a standard type, but this one has factors that kind of go outside. And also, I feel like when they talk about their clothes being removed and things, they never talk about anything taking place sexually. But because of the nature of who they were, you can see them holding things back. And something like that might be just detail that they were just too embarrassed about to get into. But it seems very likely that this is what took place. Now, the medical examiner did find that there were marks on the arms where the claws grabbed them and dragged them in. And then when they went into the ship, they did certain things on their ankles and their hands. And there were marks that were seen there. And one of the things that Calvin remembered them doing was taking blood out of his hand and replacing it with something else. Taking some blood out, putting some other fluid in. This is the type of thing that was going on. Now, there's a very strange piece here as well, which is, according to Charlie, after the abductions and after all the trauma and all the coming down from that, the beings start to communicate with him again, and his family starts to see these ships landing and, kind of expanse near the backyard of their home and things of this nature. So the contact is ongoing. And what they do, according to Charlie, is they give him this, Miss Olivia.
Mm-hmm.
They give him this very unusual thing that looks like a stone, but he says isn't a stone, it's a metal. Remember the memory metal story? That is a picture of Charles Hickson holding the stone that the aliens gave him. And guess what? The way that he would know it was time for them to have a kind of meeting of the minds was that stone would get warm, hot, hot, hot. And that's how he would know.
Circumstances?
In order for him to be contacted to go to meet the aliens.
Oh.
Yeah. So this is quite interesting. He claims, and the people who've held that stone say it doesn't feel like anything else. And he said, what's amazing about it is it's light as a feather and you can't burn it. It just made me think of the memory metal immediately. So we're looking at something here with the story, including the fact that there's going to be a follow-up incident with Calvin as well. And he's on a boat, this time on his own, fishing. And the same ship shows up. The same guys show up. But guess what? It's 20 years later. It's 1993. They show up, they drag him in, and they put him down. And what's interesting is he talks about, from the first experience, there was something that he interpreted as a woman there. And I found that interesting because in all the different things that he had laid out about this, it was hard to figure out how would you know it was a woman versus a man. And he said, I just had this sense about it. And he said, it didn't look anything like those horrible creatures. It looked like a regular human being. And she came out. The only thing that was different about her is she had a very long set of her middle finger and her first finger were very long. And she used them to go back up into his throat, into his nasal cavity. And he had a nosebleed as a result. And he was completely freaked out by the whole thing and gagging and all the rest. And she mentally communicated to him, we don't want to hurt you. So, but I guess all of these years, there was kind of a weird trauma about this aspect. So when he has the second follow-up encounter, they're laying him down on the bed again. And he experiences a strange anger where he goes after the female alien and he's restrained by the big goon robots. So that experience and the whole bit about it is like the follow-up with Charlie, except Charlie is saying it's more and more of a spiritual experience where they're showing him about how humanity needs to, kind of mend its ways, and how you can really tell people about that there are other beings in the universe and all this kind of thing. So you have two very different kind of messages going on there. And what you get is that Charlie takes it as this incredible kind of wondrous experience that he's glad that it happened and all the rest, even though it was terrifying. And then you have Calvin, nervous breakdown, life was destroyed, couldn't really get things going in life for a long, long time after that, and then didn't want to talk about it for 40 years, except for, a few times when Charlie dragged him onto TV or whatever. So when you get into thinking about the consequences of that type of thing, it makes you think of the Betty and Barney Hill case also, where Betty thinks it's incredible that she had this encounter and she feels like Christopher Columbus meeting the first off-world visitors. But Barney doesn't take to it very well, loses his job, loses his friends, and over a course of a couple of years kind of disintegrates as a person and then dies of a cerebral hemorrhage. So, and dies young. I mean, he was 45 years old when he died. So there's something interesting about the encounters, the abduction scenarios. It does great for some people and really terrible for other people. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. Woo! The missing scientist, Pascagoula UFO mystery, and alien DNA. Going deep, deep here tonight. We're going to be taking your questions momentarily as we wrap up this segment. Miss Olivia, before we do Europe.
Did they analyze that piece of metal or that stone that Charlie had?
Well, here's the interesting thing, that he said that he's had it analyzed and all the rest of it. But as far as I can tell from everything, and if somebody has information to the contrary, I would love to have it. I can't find anywhere about where that stone went, unless he left it with a relative. That's possible. But unfortunately, there's no real information that says that he did. And so what we're left with is that he had an artifact directly from that. And what he said is they'd contact him through the stone. Now, I want to mention this also, and I'll read a little bit from his hypnotic regression. But going back again to this idea of the kind of the two-eye stone and the ancient technology, he reveals, in fact, that when they're doing the examination on him, a crystal shows up and floats over him. And he talks about all of these things going on inside of the crystal. It looks like a crystal ball, literally. And when they ask him to talk about what it does, he said it spreads this blue light through the entire craft. So aspects left over from the two-eye experience right in the middle, in the heart of Charlie's abduction. I found that very interesting.
Is it like a holographic?
Yes, actually,
Okay.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly the way that he described it. I've got two different portions. Oh, I actually have the bit about the crystal here, so this is good timing. I'll read this, then we'll go to your questions, and I'll roll the rest of this presentation into that. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show, going deep, deep tonight. I want to remind you, especially if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch through the heavy, heavy censorship. We've seen it. And what you're going to get are these incredible interviews that are coming up for you. June interviews that are going to be off the charts. You won't believe it. X series episodes, the docu-series, Pyramid X, The Craze in the Hot Zone, all the Atlantis piece going on, and JFK and the UFO file. New episodes on all of that right there at your fingertips in the newsletter. Stand up and be counted. Make sure you go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for the newsletter. Okay, here we go. This is Charlie under hypnotic regression. This is a book. This one's hard to get, actually. It's Charlie's book. So much of the Calvin stuff came out in the past 5 years or so, because at the end of his life, he was like, to hell with it. I'm not afraid of this anymore. And thank God he came out and talked about it. But Charlie died in 2011, and he had put this book out, and it's such a deep, heavy duty book, but it had weird distribution. And I don't think enough people got to it. It's an expensive book. It's hard to find. UFO Contact at Pascagoula, but wow, what an incredible experience. This is directly from his hypnotic regression. I'll read a little bit of this here. So the hypnotherapist says, "What's the shape of the crystal? You told me the color. Now what's the shape?" It's round, but there's something that's on the other end of it that don't look like that. It looks like it's more solid. What looks more solid? The part from the front. Let me see a minute here. You know how a headlight fits on a car? Seems like that end might be fit for this part, something similar to that. And so the hypnotherapist is like, "I don't quite follow. Go a little bit deeper on this for me." And he says, "Well, the light itself, where it sets into the body part of the car, it looks like it might be, well, I can tell you the thing. It must come apart there because it's different. It's a different color and a different kind of material. It's the front part that seems to be just set in the other part. Like the lens would come off of a headlight, like a glass would come off of a headlight." Yes, right. And the part that comes off is the crystal part? Right. And then they go further and say, "Let's talk about this some more. The surface of the crystal, what does it look like? Something I might know?" Charlie says, "It's smooth like glass. It's a cross between a light blue and a gray, maybe like blue water. But you can see through it?" "I can see through it. I can see the ball. That's all I can see. The ball inside, it's moving." Now, Charlie, the ball inside, how big is it compared to the whole crystal? "It's much smaller than the crystal, probably almost as big as a golf ball." "How big is the crystal?" "The crystal, let me compare it with something. Let me see. You know how big a jug, a half-gallon jug is? That's about as big as the bottom of a half-gallon jug. Almost that big in diameter. Is it flat like the bottom of a jug, or is it round like the outside of marble?" "It's rounded like the outside of marble." "You said it was smooth. Its surface seems to be smooth, clear, not rough." "Like a diamond? You know how a diamond has different surfaces? It's angular?" No, it's not like a diamond." "This ball on the inside, can you take another look at it? Is that attached to anything that you can't see?" "I don't see anything. I guess it could be from the other side." "Now don't guess, take a look at it and see." "I can't see the other side of it." "You said it was moving clockwise in a circle?" "Yeah, it's moving in a circle. Does it move at the same rate of speed, or does it slow down and speed up?" "It looks to be moving about the same rate of speed." "How big is that circle? Does it move near the edge of the crystal, the outside edge, or more towards the middle?" "It moves towards the outside edge, not touching the outside, though." "How thick do you think the crystal is?" "I can't tell." What is the crystal doing now when you look at it? What's it doing? Take a close look at it. Crystal's not doing anything. It's standing still in front of my face. It's real close. Can you feel anything, Charlie? "I can't feel anything. The light is still bright, really bright." "But your eyes are getting used to it now?" "Uh-huh," he says. "The ball's still moving, Charlie? It's still moving. It's getting around slow." And so on it goes. That's a picture, actually, of what he was describing. And you get that impression, again, of this examination that's taking place where they're kind of looking at more than just his physical body. There's some strange interaction with this crystal. And I'll read another quote from him when we get into the question part. But for now, Miss Olivia, I'm going to give it all over to you.
Mike Vax says, didn't Dr. Farrell describe a hypothesis he had about crystals trapping light or photons? Didn't he say it related to potential pyramid tech?
I'm sure that he did. And it's interesting because, of course, we had a whole episode, and one of the things that Farrell was talking about in relation to crystals, because I was doing this whole emphasis that Casey was giving to crystals and how the Atlanteans used them. And he was saying, and I thought this was interesting, Farrell was saying, well, crystals, if they could be grown in outer space, would probably have totally different qualities. And so there's this idea about the Atlanteans and the way that they are mining the crystal. Now, it's also interesting to note that Casey talks about how they would mine the true lapis, the azurite, from that very interesting Queen's mine in Bisbee. And I've always found this fascinating because there's a whole encounter, where he goes with this young protege who invents FM radio, and they both head off to Arizona down to Bisbee, and they go into this incredible mine where supposedly the Atlanteans had been mining this really incredible, what Casey called true lapis. And the remnants of that whole thing are actually at the Natural Museum in New York City. It is the singing stone, and the thing weighs over 4 tons. And people who were around it would say, when it was where the sun came through the window, you could hear it sing. When they moved it, eventually, nobody could hear it sing anymore, and there were these letter writing campaigns, and then they kind of hid this thing off. But I think the singing stone is quite remarkable, and we start to get a hint at the power of these things and the way that Casey's describing them, and why the Atlanteans went to places like the Arizona mine to get it. And it's interesting to note also that Casey talks, when he recommends things to certain people, he'll tell them, wear the lapis lazuli. And there's this incredible wave, if you look back to the 90s, where people are buying crystal this and crystal that, and lapis lazuli becomes, this kind of fascinating thing. And it's very interesting to note that when Casey was telling people to wear or carry a stone, he made very interesting impressions that the stone should not be polished, at least for lapis anyway. So that's something to keep in mind. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Lamb. I lived in Pascagoula in the late 80s. My husband was stationed on the USS Wisconsin, and we saw a few different UFO sightings out there.
Wow.
A couple of them made the news, so we weren't the only ones.
Interesting.
Najat wants to know, are there any antique or ancient drawings of similar creatures?
Well, there's those weird ones from Italy, that's from Sicily, and there are weird ones from Australia as well that, people have assumed looked kind of like abstract grays or whatever. And they have some resemblance to things like that. But I have to tell you that the almost monstrous quality of these make you feel that they were manufactured, and that there's some mix of, kind of human, animal, android aspect going on with it. That's the impression that I got. And then when you think about Litton being in the mix down there to such a level, and the things that they were involved with, you start to think to yourself, so instead of just thinking of them straight up as a MyLab type group, the military abduction coming in and pretending to be aliens or whatever, how about this is the military kind of paying off their alien friends, their off-worlders, or whoever they are? And a lot of this might track back to all the work that we do about the Cosmos Club, because the more that I've looked into the Cosmos Club, when you see that the founder, Powell, goes deep, into the Grand Canyon, and he studies with the Native Americans, and he does all these things. And he's, before this, he's a nobody. He's a soldier who's in very difficult circumstances with one arm, a veteran of the Civil War. And then by 1872, he is the toast of Washington, D.C., and they want him to lead this division and that division, all these new things, the national explorations and all the rest of it. And he founds the Cosmos Club, and the money pours in. Now, I have a show coming up about Wovoka and the Paiutes that Powell met up with. And my suspicions are that he encounters some kind of technology, some major secret back there, and that's how the Cosmos Club gets off the ground. The Cosmos Club will eventually become UFO Bilderberg, right in the heart of the UFO story. And that's where all the major figures from the UFO file on the secret deep state side and the other side, like the J. Allen Hyneks and all the rest of it, they'll all be there in the same circle. So the Cosmos Club, there's a lot of secrets to be had there. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Mike Fax says the Holloman landings ETs were described as having pointed features.
Well, yeah, that's true, actually. And those are weird, too, because the pictures that they have of the Holloman landing, they look like Sumerian gods, right? That's they even have, you know, the whole presentation of their look. It looks like, you know, they came out. And I wonder if that's just an artist impression or they really look like that. Because if they did, then they could have been Sumerians that were grabbed a long, long time ago. Yes.
Lazen River, those men, Charlie and Calvin, had the same expressions the Apollo 11 men had during their press conference.
Wow. Well, you know, I'll tell you, they went through something real. When they talk about the beings they encountered, you can feel it if you tune into it. If you have any sensitivity, you can tune in and tell that they were dealing with something real. Now, the question is, did the mutants, you know, did the government, did Litton Industries make these mutants? And did they stage the whole thing? Did they have the anti-gravity to hover on the ground and float these people in and do all the things? What about the encounters that they had as very young men that they remember later? Or what about the later encounters? Does the government continue to track them? Is it all just that? Or is there an intelligence that the government has interacted with and discovered that comes into play? And I find it interesting that at once Calvin Parker for 2 weeks was put into a mental institution. 1, 2, he tries to sign up for the military right after that. And then they say, no, we can't take you for medical reasons. And that's it. The medical reasons, if you really press on the subject, are the fact that he reported this entire event. So there's a lot of questions to be answered there. I'll tell you what I've deduced is that there's some combination of advanced human technology, black project aspect with something outside, whether you want to call it alien or another species here or Atlantean technology. There's something other operating in the Pascagoula case. It's not just a MyLab. And yet I've presented probably the most convincing evidence for the MyLab type aspects to it by bringing Litton Industries in, which nobody knew anything about in relation to the case. You have to understand the importance of Litton if you're going to understand that case. Yes.
Tim Houston, Charlie apparently could not wear a watch. It's in one of John Keel's books, just like a lot of near-death experiencers.
Yeah. I think Charlie is psychic. And I think his almost dying in the Korean War probably brought it really up high. As a matter of fact, when he's being recorded secretly by the sheriff, that they sit them in a room and they're like, we'll be right back, don't worry about it, to see what they talk about. And that recording is still available. He says to Calvin, you know, I thought I had gone through a living hell on this earth, but then I have to deal with this. And Calvin is like basically in a state of shock. And it's funny because what Charlie says about Calvin is that he reminded him very much of the shell shock army guys that he, you know, who went through something traumatic when their battalion got blown up or whatever it happened to be. He said Calvin showed all the PTSD signs immediately. And I have to say, it's a long road back for Calvin. And that's one of the reasons that he didn't talk about this experience at all. Can you imagine being in that kind of environment where no one even thinks about UFOs or whatever? It was 1973. There's some space stuff, you know, there's Star Trek or whatever. But you're in Mississippi and, you know, you're God-fearing culture. And then a UFO shows up, basically monstrous beings come out, grab you, do an examination on you. You think that they're going to take you to another planet or kill you or whatever it happens to be. And then they have you for 45 minutes, an hour. There's a lot of missing time involved. It may have been longer. They drop you off. What are you supposed to do with that? And then, if anything, Calvin, in the early stages of it, wants to hide the whole experience. He's like, don't tell anybody. And Charlie's like, don't worry about it. I just need to call my wife. But he goes out and he calls Kessler Air Force Base and he's like, you have to get on top of this. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Oldest dirt. So they take clothes off, but we never hear if the clothing was damaged or put back on wrong. No buttons missing?
Well, what's interesting is when they get back after going through all this, Calvin actually takes a bath with bleach. He wants to get this off him. Yeah. And he burns his clothes. And he said, I wish I hadn't, because I bled on one of the shirts, and it's probably was some kind of something scientific DNA wise that they could have picked up on there. But they're not able to do it because he burns the clothes. And I don't know what Charlie did with his, but Charlie was a little more methodical and less emotionally tortured by the whole. I mean, he's shaken up, but he comes to see it because of his ongoing interactions with it, shall we say. He comes to see it as a more positive, almost integrates it into his spiritual vision of, I needed to do this for the world kind of thing. And only at the end of his life, he's when Calvin's facing cancer and things of this nature, does he go to bat on all this and say, you know what, I will tell this story. And he had in little ways in the beginning, he had talked about it, but really it came full circle by the end of his life. And God bless him. He came out and talked a lot. He wrote a book, and he said, the only way I'll have the book come out is if it's written by me and they don't fix any of the grammatical errors. He goes, and I'll tell you this, I can't even really spell my own name, but I'm going to do my best with this. And there's all kinds of spelling errors to that book, but it's a wonderfully raw document. And he just didn't want the story messed with at all. He said the story was already so fantastic. So some of the impressions that I had when looking at Litton Industries and their outfits in the 1950s were starting to give me that deep sense that, not all is right here. And I think that gives us a little bit more of that as well. And what do you got?
Connectomatic says bathing in bleach sounds like post-rape behavior, which was exactly what my thoughts were.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I realized that I left one of the key pictures actually on the printer.
You want to go grab it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's actually... look, right there.
Before I do that, Mike Fack wants to know, did anyone collect water samples from the boat or surrounding area? I'd be curious whether they tested for radiation, chemical anomalies, or any other unusual signatures.
Yeah, they tested Calvin, and I might have moved it off the printer by the case. They tested Calvin, and they did test them both for radiation. So they went through this kind of degaussing, as it were. But they found a little radiation on Calvin, but nothing really complex. Now, when they got taken in after all this, they had them hypnotically regressed by the military. Then the military checked them out, also trying to figure out, what else is going on here. And then they had Hynek come in, and Hynek came in within 24 hours. So this is quite remarkable. And as it turns out, this is just part of the setup for the entire story. They'd gone through within that first 48-hour period. Their job said, you can't come here anymore. You have to sign onto this press release, saying that the shipyard had nothing to do with this, and really get the press off our backs. And, so it's an incredible whirlwind that's all around them. It's amazing in a way that they came through as good as they did. What else you got?
Interesting. Rat Boy Genius says it's not relevant, but evidently Litton Industries has the distinction of creating the first robotic factory system that actually killed a human.
Oh, boy. Oh, I'm not
Seems
surprised.
on brand.
Well, Litton is very interesting because they get very involved with the Nixon administration, and they're just in the heart of that kind of deep state operation. Their presence at Pascagoula, I think, tells us at least they're aware of what's going on. And one of the things that I'm going to read here, I'll hold off on this one, is there's a nuclear, what happens basically, I might just summarize this because it's a long read, but basically, I mentioned this preliminarily, but about 5 weeks after the incident, there is all this activity, USO activity that goes on right there within 5 miles. And there are all these reports from the Coast Guard saying, we have UFOs all over. What's going on down there? And it's interesting because at a certain point, they send some kind of underwater submarine, I guess, down there to check it out, and it bumps into it. So there's a craft hanging out down there under the water. Now, one of the weird things in this case that lingers out there is a witness who said when she was looking across the river, she could see that something was going on, that there was a craft or something, and she was waiting for her husband to come back from this boat. So she's hanging out there, and then she hears this amazing splash on her side of the river. And she runs down to the edge of the pier or whatever and looks down, and she sees what looks like one of those weird creatures with no necks swimming, swimming away. What they would be doing in the water, is totally bizarre. But she's also somebody who gave testimony. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Yeah, I keep thinking about the texture of its skin because
Yes.
aquatic, usually, I mean, you think about dolphins and whales, they're smooth. It's thick, smooth because it's not aerodynamic, but it's sort of aquadynamic, right?
Yes.
But this thing is wrinkled and rough. It sounds like somebody was saying rhinoceros skin.
Yes.
And
Charlie said elephant.
okay, same idea.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't associate that with an aquatic being.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because he said that it was lighter than an elephant's skin. So it was
In
the same,
color.
yeah, in color. But it was the same type of texture.
But again, you
in fact.
think elephant, you think dry.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
That you don't swim in water smoothly with a textured skin like that. So the fact that they swim underwater is so strange.
It is. Yeah, incredible.
Okay,
Also, they
Green
can
Tea
float.
says alligators have a rough hide. That's true.
Well, it's interesting too. The only sounds that are reported to happen from them are these weird kind of shifting sounds, and that at a certain point they make a low hum, the beings themselves. And when the woman comes out and looks over Calvin, he hears her giving like weird low hums to these beings that are hanging out. And it's quite interesting because he said, if you live in Pascagoula, you know what an alligator's mating call sounds like? That's what it sounded like. And he gave impressions of it. You can hear it on his hypnosis tape, but it's like a very low humming sound. And he said that's the sound that she would give to these beings who, after they were done, setting him up in this table and like where he's elevated in suspended animation, they would go in the corner and kind of power down. They were done, So they were robotic. It's very interesting. In Charlie's case, he sees the robots doing the stuff. He sees no woman, but he sees behind this kind of circular window that there are beings back there, and he figures out they're the ones who are controlling the whole thing. And he feels, although he's not sure, that later on they're the ones who contact him. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 227. It's alien DNA, missing scientists, and the Pascagoula UFO mystery. We've taken a lot with Pascagoula on this. We're going to take more of your questions, and you're up.
It's disconcerting. I can say
Yeah.
this case, I mean,
It is.
Betty and Barney Hill is kind of a feel-good story by comparison.
I know Betty and Barney Hill, they're like, oh, we can't take your zipper down. And in this case, they're like, lie on the table or we'll kill you. Yeah, it is very disconcerting. And the overwhelming kind of resemblance of the outfits, I think, is at least the fact that Litton is there and they're one of the best outfit makers for kind of spacey looking stuff is a little bit strange. Also, the fact that they are really in the heart of the Hollywood thing in Beverly Hills, and that they're so obsessed with Hollywood imagery and all the rest of it, it would also make them good. It's very interesting because one of the things that I found, and I'll post this later because I didn't print it, but it's this early Litton flat screen type thing. And they haven't figured out how to project a movie on their thing. They're kind of moving these colors and things on it. And if you listen to Charles Hickson when he's under, you can hear him describe something that looks like a screen, but there's nothing on it. It just moves and it has these gradations of color and things. So there are real obvious overlays with Litton. And the fact that they're there, you have to at least put them on the suspect list for being involved with this. But the whole thing is so spooky and out of time and has such apotheum effects attached to it that if they're not used, if it's not an actual ET abduction case, they're employing that off-world technology, that other technology, the X technology in this, and you're getting apotheum effects like floating, like missing time, like batteries that won't start, like magnetized cars, like windows that break, all this type of stuff. And it's interesting because the people who were guarding the other side of the bridge and looking across, as I mentioned, when they did go to them with the Coast Guard, the reports came out later that they had seen something flying around earlier, like a half hour earlier. And if you go really far back in the histories, you can find that in 1887, right there in that exact same area, 500 different people went to the newspaper of the period of the time, and there was a huge kind of UFO wave that people were watching that freaked them out, which is kind of in line with the whole airship mystery period of time. Yes.
Professor Hamamoto says Litton heavily involved with magnetron production.
Oh, excellent point. Excellent point. Well, that would take them into this alternate technology piece, and it would leave them well practiced in exotic technology. A little more, this is some of the hypnotic suggestion and some of the hypnotic session. I'll just read a little bit more from this one. Now, this is a different book. This is kind of the ultimate companion to Calvin Parker's first book. It's Pascagoula, The Story Continues. And they release everything in here. It's like they found all of this other stuff that took place around the whole thing. And it's a much more kind of complete version. But there are all kinds of things that take place, like illnesses. So Charlie can't sleep for 6 months. Try that one on. And he has cold sweats and all these types of things. And he's the 40-something military vet. Okay. So Calvin Parker having a nervous breakdown, I guess, we can see what's going on here. So this is a really a different kind of a story in this sense, that their whole lives are upended by this. But they have a series of unusual medical issues, including the fact of Calvin Parker has nosebleeds, which I think is interesting considering they went up through his nasal cavity. And then he feels that they had done little things like blood transfusions. Later, when he's re-abducted, they do the same process, but he feels like they're taking it out. They're taking the tracking device, the whole thing of watching him, all the experiences they recorded in his being for 20 years. They're taking it back out and they're reading it. And it's funny because I will say this, the whole thing about implants, if you track the history, and maybe some people who've been following this or grew up with the UFO aspect, it looks, the first time that I ever heard anything about implants was in a Whitley Strieber book. And then John Mack, when I talked to him, he had a whole thing about somebody he would send to people to get rid of implants. And there's this Roger Lear guy who was out there who would remove implants and all the rest. And there's a whole thing about that. But what is the first real story about this? Because I have to say, I think they're ahead of their time here in the 73 case talking about implants, because I hadn't heard anything in the literature further back, unless somebody can correct me on that. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Great story. Only 4 other species of aliens. What do you think, DJ?
No, well, you're dealing with all kinds of things. This is part of the problem. So I go back to an Edgar Cayce story. He, when he was a boy, okay, so he could see discarnates. So he could see his grandfather when he passed away. He witnessed his grandfather dying when he went, the grandfather who was close, very close to him and had psychic ability, could lift tables and levitate things. He goes and he's going to give the horse a drink, and Edgar's hanging out by the side of the lake, and the horse throws him and he drowns. And Casey has to watch it because he's only a 5-year-old boy and he can't swim. So it's like an early trauma. And he experiences immediately, and he tells his parents, I'm hanging out with the grandfather in the barn. And he's telling me all these things and all the rest of it. And he's around for a while. And the parents are like, you shouldn't be saying this. And, they deal with it. But they're used to Edgar on this front, and then he's interacting with these invisible friends, and he has names for them and all the rest of it. And he said, if I didn't have them when I was growing up, I don't know what my life would have been like. And they felt so close to me, and he named them. He had whole experiences with them. Now it's interesting because later he'll ask the source, the reading source itself, what was going on with those early experiences of my invisible friends. And they said they were early pre-incarnation entities of who you would meet later. So Morton Blumenthal, who was the stockbroker from New York, who was a very close ally, very spiritual guy, and then turned crazy, with the stock market craze and became too greedy and all the rest. He's a big, chapter in Casey's life. And this was an early version where Casey's meeting him and interacting with him, and they're friends as children. And then years later, he'll meet him in real life. So there are inter-between beings who are going to be human who are also here. Then if you read the Casey material and the Steiner material, there's elementals that have to do with nature. There are other types of elementals. Not all elementals are good or friendly to human beings either. As a matter of fact, one of J. Allen Hynek's assistants went on the record, and I got this story firsthand, but he said, I think the answer to the UFO enigma is in this book. And he pointed to Theosophy by Rudolf Steiner. Now, the Theosophy, the book, isn't about the Theosophical movement or anything like that. It's literally Steiner's version of Theosophy. And it's all throughout there, peppered throughout there, are these elementals. And Steiner kind of describes a gigantic competition of different types of spiritual forces, some on the negative side and some on the positive side. And that this goes on in this huge, series of things, from Ahriman to the Christian, to the Christ force. And you have these all manners of shade in between. When you're talking about beings, we get very stiff in our intellectual flexibility if we just think, oh, that's a Pleiadian, that's a gray, and that's this. It gets it's a different way. We do have human experience that tells us there are these different types of beings, but it is, let's say it's an ongoing um, revelation that it's not a very defined science at this point, who is who or where they're coming from. But, when you think about all these things, as I mentioned, from discarnates and ghosts, astral entities, there's all kinds of levels of things. So does one thing get mistaken for another thing? Yes. So one of the things I like to do is go back to Gordon Cooper's story about when he's doing all of these plane dynamics and training his squadron there in Germany in the early 50s. And these UFOs show up, and they are the classic UFO flying saucer type thing. And they start doing the exact same maneuvers, imitating them as kind of a joke, and then take off out of there, right? Faster than light. So they're showing them, look, we're keeping an eye on you. So it doesn't seem to me like that has any attribution that, we have the vice president calling UFOs demons. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. It's absurd. How can a politician tell you, it would be like a politician saying ghosts are evil. It's ridiculous. A politician can't tell you anything. And neither can Eric Burleson and, them trying to pitch this at Christians. And the Christians I know are much savvier than the political class gives them credit for. And if they think that they can, pull this over to angels or demons, read the Book of Enoch. I guarantee you that, Anna Luna doesn't have the first idea what the Book of Enoch is about at all. And, the reason I say that is because she's on with this track of, hey, we have to make aliens evil. And that's why I won't call them aliens. I'm going to call them demons. It's ridiculous. I mean, how absurd. And, you have to integrate like real spirituality with your science, but you don't want to be anti-science either. That's ridiculous. So you look at something you don't understand and you call it a demon. How stupid is that? And what's your version of demon? And then does anyone who doesn't agree with you become a demon? This is part of the issue I had with the simplification that was going on with what they were doing about the story with the alien DNA story, and how they took basically something that was subject matter that I had worked on with Dr. Farrell in a number of episodes, and they just splatted it through, and they did, what was it, Giorgiani? They quoted Giorgiani. So he's a big plagiarizer. And what's interesting, though, is the guy who brought it up first, I mentioned this in the last episode, was the CIA agent, John Ramirez. And so he prefaced the whole thing. He presaged the whole wave in 2023 talking about this, Mr. CIA himself. So you have to ask yourself when you go through these things, ultimately, do you want Central Intelligence Agency, counterintelligence people doing mind jobs on you about what these things mean? Or do you want to think for yourself? And can we research it without any of that interference? Because if that's what the disclosure movement turned into, an arm of the CIA, then we have to go a totally other direction. For me, that direction is the dark journalism that we do on this show. That's the potency. You want the potency? G.G. Young's work, the work here on this show of the X series, the guests that we have on this show, not, superficial podcast people being like, CIA agent told me, there's 20 different types of grays out there. I mean, that's really completely useless. So, and I understand there are going to be levels of superficiality in everything, but the dominant voice around the UFO thing it seems to be a lot of people who've been snowballed by the CIA, and they're actually, like trained SEALs repeating the CIA talking points without thinking anything or knowing anything about the subject. That's a problem. And one of the things that I did is I put up this picture in our X feed, and I have the picture here, actually. It's a picture of Reagan with Michael Jackson. And I remember reading this story about Reagan bringing out Michael Jackson and not knowing any of his music. but he wanted to be seen around the thing that was popular. So they rolled out Michael Jackson during Thriller, and you got Reagan standing up there with him. Well, this is pretty wild because that's exactly, a snapshot moment, just snapshot right on that, because it's this incredible, moment where that's what the moment that we're in now. It's Reagan standing next to Michael Jackson, but that's the media and the podcast thing. And they're standing next to the UFO file, and the UFO file is off the charts, right? Trump is sitting there and he's like, "Oh, we mentioned extraterrestrial and we're number one," I mean, this is not how you want to roll out disclosure. You want a very informed, potent, practical thing that's life-changing on a large scale, in relation to Miss Olivia. Nicely done.
Okay. David Termina, DJ, Litton Shipbuilding was actually a merger with a larger, much older company, Huntington Ingalls.
Yeah.
Hollis P. Huntington was a California railroad tycoon with connections to the airship mystery. The Huntington family is also connected with the founding of the Mormon religion.
Yeah. Huntington HI is what it became. Very interesting. Yes, very interesting. And I think if we look at it, you're going to see a few companies that provide an interface to Black Project activity around the UFO file in that period that set everything up for what we get later. What's interesting to me, and what I have not got to the bottom of yet, but I will, is the activity around Litton Industries and virus production, including the early versions of gain of function, and their reports to the Nixon administration about that, and how all of that work around gain of function gets outlawed in that period of the Nixon administration, at least officially. I wonder how far Litton had got with that, and if this wasn't violating, sort of chemical warfare norms under treaties, etc., but was part of the planning in the background that eventually rolls out as the COVID operation in 2020. Yes. Yeah.
Blazon River, which would freak people out more, finding out aliens are real and from outer space, or real and from Earth?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it has to be considered. It must be, because we don't know everything about what's been going on here. We know that advanced technology has existed in the past, and we know someone preserved that line down to, the Jewish prophet Ezekiel. So 1500 BC, and then we know that people are using all kinds of strange things, including Solomon, who's flying around everywhere. So the technology is working in the background. It's just forbidden. It's verboten on the level when you move it into the realms of society. As a matter of fact, and I quoted this in a book maybe 2 months ago. I think the X series episode was 220. But I'll come back with this book. But the upshot was, it was all the early versions that indicated we had airships at earlier periods. All the things about flight. It was this incredible compilation. And those stories that come out of India in that period around the 13th century, as I mentioned, they say, oh, you have to make this thing for the king, but don't tell the citizens about it, because then it'll just become like everything else, and they'll take it for granted, and they won't realize the sacred experience of flight and all the rest of it. And it's interesting, they have to recruit these Greeks, because the Greeks are the one who preserved the technique and the ability on how to do it. And so the term that they discuss about the people who will make them is the same term that they use for Greeks in that period. So apparently the airship aspect, or the maintaining of the technology, probably moved something like out of Egypt and into a couple of different cultures, but I can think the Persian culture and the Greek culture. Yes.
Mike Brosnahan, Litton Bionetics exemplified the era's growth in contract biomedical research tied to defense and public health needs, especially at Fort Detrick, an historic U.S. Army biological research site. And Professor Hamamoto, Dr. Leonard Horowitz connects Litton with AIDS in his work on emerging viruses.
Oh, yeah. See, that's what we're talking about. Their work, see, they're so close in on the Black Project side that we can track their activity, but we have to understand something else too. When we get around the UFO file, we get around viruses. As a matter of fact, a number of people associated with that early push for TTSA, including Lou Elizondo himself, had patented different viruses, and most of them had some sort of medical background, some sort of medical piece along with all of this. And it is interesting to note the amount of activity between Litton Industries and aerospace medicine. And of course, it is aerospace medicine that becomes the backdrop and the cloak, but it becomes the crucial division of all this. And as well, it should be in many ways, but if you think about Hughes Aircraft operating as a medical charity, for example, we've got all kinds of streams of medical pieces directly into the alien aspect. And don't tell me they wouldn't use the UFO threat, incorporate a kind of COVID threat thing. They did an episode, not even an episode, but when they rebooted the X-Files, they did something exactly like that. You needed the antidote and all that stuff. And that's just a show, but it is, you can see these ideas have plugged in over time. And I've always thought with Chris Carter, the creator of the X series, of the X-Files, he is somebody who's very plugged in. He's revealed things that were literally decades away. So I think that's part of the machinery, as it were. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is X Series 227. It's Alien DNA Missing Scientist, Pascagoula UFO Mystery. We're taking your questions now, and we'll ride a little bit longer with you here. And I have a couple more quotes for you as well. I want to quote from, I often turn to this guy's work because I came across him at a crucial period because there was a NORAD guy who had made a prediction about UFOs coming in and making themselves known on this date over New York City on October 13th, 2010. And I remember at the time I was working at a lifestyle magazine, and I got a press release about it. And I thought, isn't this interesting? And right up my alley. So I kept an eye on it, and I got it about a month before. And then lo and behold, on October 13th, 2010, there were these incredible daylight sightings right over the West Village where I lived for a while. So I was starting to think to myself, there's so many prediction things around the UFO field that never come to pass. And here's this ex-NORAD officer nailing it, and nobody's paying attention to it. As a matter of fact, all of the UFO people that I talked to, and they were kind of the main UFO people at the period, they either didn't show any interest in it, they weren't cognizant of it. There was like a weird blackout in their imagination. And I was like, I've got all this footage. There's footage all over the internet about this thing. Cab drivers took pictures of this thing, and they would all kind of trance out like, no, I'm not aware of it. Maybe I'll look into. I mean, it was like, what's going on here? And what happened was I got in touch with him, Stan Fulham, and he even went on Coast to Coast. I had a very short segment with him, and he was, I think he was about 80 years old, and he'd had this great background, and he was trying to get to the bottom of things. But he had heard this prediction through a kind of Casey-style psychic named Rick Thurston. And then when I went to follow up with him, he died. He died within a month or so of the prediction. And I thought, well, that's really terrible, but also strange. And then I decided to track down the psychic behind the whole thing. So that is Rick Thurston, and he has some interesting things to say here to kind of give us some idea about who's behind all of this. Yeah, someone mentioned Richard Dolan there. I did talk to Richard Dolan at the time. Total blank slate on it, which was weird. And then, you know, I would interview Dolan for this show later, and those interviews are fine. But then later on, he would jump in with the Elizondo and all that stuff. So I wouldn't have anything to do with that. And he, you know, Dolan had put it out there that anybody who didn't get on board with Elizondo and Mellon, they were gonna, you know, it was gonna be a bad time for them. Really weird, you know. It's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but you get used to that around this field. Like people get sucked in and they're not who they used to be. All right, but this comes directly out of the readings of the Transcenders for Stan Fulham, the NORAD officer. And it's in this little book called Challenges of Change that I mention once in a while, but there's some real juicy little things in here. Okay. Aliens and their spacecraft have invaded our Earth environment for thousands, perhaps millions of years. The reality of the universe was a constant threat for the doctrines of the Church. The College of Cardinals recoiled at the horror of Galileo's telescope, and so on. So this guy sets this up, and then he asks the question of the Transcenders, will the Brazilian government introduce the Botes to the world? Now, the Botes are the Greys, the way that the Transcenders talk about them. And it's interesting that I mentioned Brazil here, because when I started the show, I was going to do all these news updates about Peter Thiel in Argentina. But he's moving all of his activities there, which I find very interesting. And his little errand boy, Jesse Michaels, who we've pointed out on this show before, he's also in South America. What do you know about that? But here's the quote. The most impact, if they do so, will it have a powerful impact on mankind, positive or negative? So they're talking about if the Greys got revealed by a South American government. And this is, remember, 2009, 2010. The most impact will be on the concepts of religion. You state that the U.S. UFO cabal has intervened in the situation in Brazil at the request of the Botes contacts. So this is the Greys telling the government, you know, we want these Greys who crashed in Brazil back. How is this communication with the aliens conducted? The communication process between the U.S. UFO cabal and the Botes can be conducted in a Botes communication device somewhat similar to the concept of your radio system. It works on a frequency which does not operate on a third dimensional reality. Try finding records of that, you know, in your UFO legacy history. It works on a frequency which does not operate on the third dimensional reality. They use the system for their initial contact with the cabal to set up rendezvous points where they will meet with their American contacts. They have also used it for emergency situations, but again, they're somewhat paranoid that their signals will be picked up by somebody else, including other aliens. So just leaning into this for a moment, not only do you have, you know, this thing going on with the Botes, the American government, and them trying to keep it from the public, but they're also worried about other alien groups tuning in as well. There's much political pressure on Brazil from other countries, especially the United States, to release their alien hostage back to the Botes, the Greys. The Vatican is fully aware and extremely concerned with the alien situation. It will be interesting to see what Brazil, a strong Catholic nation, will do with the mounting political pressure. And so on it goes. But you can see there are aspects here that aren't so obvious. So there's one other quote here that I think kind of goes along with this to give us an idea of what's going on in the background when you deal with the UFO file. The growing sophistication of American and Soviet weaponry in this era, and they're talking now back to the 1960s, brought the alien abductions to an impending crisis. The aliens knew that the American and Soviet radar locked on and monitored their spacecraft, and they observed their missile programs with growing concern. The Botes are a very scientific and pragmatic race. The stakes in their cat and mouse game were too high to lose. They were a dying race, and their survival depended on the genetic interaction with humans. Now, I find these types of snippets of things very interesting because there's a big thing about cloning and DNA in relation to the grays. That seems to have come up over and over again. And when you get something that comes up in an overwhelming but organic fashion, that's not just a CIA thing, but it's coming through, psychics and researchers and writers, then it's something I think to pay attention to. There's something about cloning on the alien side, and the grays seem to have, that's where their role is. And that's why they've been the genetic harvesters of humanity classically, so that you have these people, they go in, even Betty and Barney Hill, they're having these sexual exams, and they're having sperm samples taken and these types of things. That's what happens when you're dealing with the classic abduction scenario. If you study it, and we've kind of lost a lot of this, say, over the past decade or so, because it's all been about, Chris Mellon is trying to tell us, he's trying to set us free. There's been a lot of dopey stuff about intelligence agencies giving you the truth, which they'll never do. It's not in their interest to do. That's why they've never done it. And they've kept their own misdeeds hidden and their clients' misdeeds hidden. Because remember, most intelligence agencies are just the client front for the major supranational corporations. So, you have to be real about these things. And it's much better to understand, that's a kind of superficial world out the way they're dealing with the UFO file, but the real thing is totally different. But I do think it's interesting because previous to that, when the work around the UFO field was a little more organic, you have people like David Jacobs, who we've talked to on this program, who are doing this whole thing about hybrids and claims to have interacted with them and tracked their activity. Now, that is a professor at Temple University with tenure who has been doing this stuff since the 1970s. So we could look at him and say, oh, yeah, all your stuff about hybrids is ridiculous or whatever. Or he knows a lot more than we do because he's been on it for 50 years. Which one do you pick? I tend to go with the latter, that he would know a lot better because he's been studying it a lot longer and worked with some of the best people. And in my own conversations with him, I've found him a very, very sound intellect. And, his books are very interesting in that regard. So at least we should leave ourselves open to that. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 227, Alien DNA, Missing Scientists, Pascagoula UFO Mystery. We've gotten some hint here about the experience of Calvin Parker and Charlie. And Charlie, I have to say, Charles Hickson, I think he literally had something of a dark night of the soul, spiritual crisis with this, and came back with, this is for humanity's sake, and we all need to learn this. And I will say that I think their encounter is quite unique, and there is an alien factor involved of some sort. There's an X technology APOTHEUM factor that goes beyond, just what a military would do. It's got aspects where they're integrating and using at least an alien technology. Let's take a couple more of your questions and then we'll ride it out into the great sunset. Miss Olivia.
Okay. Bo Krills says, give me a second. If they're so advanced and scientific, how do they get into their situation and why do they need our help? Bear Wallace responds, they need our help scenario has to do with the time traveling humans from the future who need our DNA to fix their DNA manipulation and single sex organism thing. I think we have to really take a look at transhumanism.
Yeah.
And psychopathy.
Yeah.
And it's just about connecting dots. We already see the 1%, how powerful they are. They have outsized power. And, they've spoken openly about their plans, to live forever. And,
Yes.
so if they get their way, they're going to it's like Atlantis, they're going to genetically engineer bodies, create android situation, cyborg, so that they can live forever.
We're already heading in the direction.
Right, we can see it.
But here's what's interesting. The Atlanteans did it right. So you don't need an alien story like, oh, hey, some alien civilization was on some planet. They cloned themselves out and now they destroyed everything and they're trying to rebuild it or whatever. That's exactly what the Atlanteans did. In the Casey story, what did they do? They created their own hybrid, the automatons, who were these cyborgs, part human, part machine, part animal. And they would do all of their tasks for them so that they became physically lazy. They gorged themselves on, their own aspirations. And when you think about it, you literally don't need an alien civilization for that. What is interesting is there does seem to be this idea that if we went along this track, that we could clone ourselves out and that we would make big mistakes. We've already seen them trying to control, a number of things in terms of physical reproduction, gender, and all the rest of it. So we're in a totally unusual situation scientifically that has not existed before, say, the past century. So it is, this is just like with the nuclear technology. You have to stand up and look at that stuff in the face and say, how are these people going to use it? How are the eugenics people with the transhumanism going to do it? And how are they using that for control? And, what constitutes a violation of human ethics? Is Neuralink a violation of human ethics? Or brain chips violating what it is to be a human being. They're already talking very openly without any consent from the governed about eliminating half the jobs on the planet to AI because they can do that. Well, it's been the experience of history that when you don't consult the population and things work against that population rises up. And they're thinking, I believe, in those circles, that what they can do is through surveillance and through, the incredible digital control of your life, that they will have this ability, this great power to do it. The only problem is, in my opinion, there's a great part of their plan that's been exposed. And so it becomes, a little more challenging. You would need an emergency. You would need a UFO threat. You'd need a sky event. You need something to seize all the centers of control. That's why the continuity of government program needs to be front and center in these discussions. That's why the CIA, when you see the CIA or James Clapper around the UFO file, you take your hand and you move them aside. And if you don't do that, then you're going to get, they're going to do a mind job on you. When you see this, just say no, right? You cannot have the CIA running the UFO file disclosure. And if you do, because you have, dummies who are at these networks who just fall in line with the CIA, or if you have people in the independent space or, who are actually corporate plants or whatever, and they just are naive about the UFO file and think having CIA people on is good, then, there needs to be some kind of human awareness that that's a bad thing, that counterintelligence people can't be in charge of this, and that there's no reason. In fact, you can have a board, like a brain trust, to deal with this. That would include scientists, that would include, all sorts of people from various climes of the social life of humanity. But to have a bunch of CIA people trying to run it, that's the worst possible scenario. You'd be better off with not even talking about the subject than having a false, sick CIA version, and to have them come back and be like, here's your human origin story. it's all the grays or something. I mean, they'd make up anything. So no, it has to be done. It has to be done by humanity and carefully by humanity. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Blazon River, if there is a real alien presence, could it be that it is they who want disclosure at this time and the US government is freaking out?
Well, I think that the groups that operate in the background, the fact that they intentionally hypnotize the people not to remember, they give them kind of a suggestion. You're not going to remember this. Remember Betty Hills Jr.? What did Junior say? You're going to forget the whole thing. And they had to go to their own hypnosis session and through dreams and other things break through to those memories. So whoever these beings are don't want you to remember. Now,
actually, I'm going to cut in here for a second. I was just thinking, if I never thought this before, if they were humans who had screwed up our evolution in the future, time traveling back, why not just say so? That way we won't do it again. I mean,
well, there's a number of ways you could take it. I don't employ time travel as one of the aspects on it because you don't have to. Because, it is one of those things that you can theoretically work with the idea that, hey, these people are coming back through time or whatever. But we can use the scientific tools that we have at our behest. And even with those tools, for example, in the case of the Roswell crash, going back to 1947, in the case of the Cosmos Club, Cape Girardeau, and things like that, there's a hint here involved that there's a group here that's operating. So you could grant it that there might be space visitors coming and replenishing that group or whatever it happens to be. But it seems like there's a group here. So you could take that as a basis and then follow on from there. And there seems to be a genetic harvesting process that's involved in the slew of thousands of people who've recorded and reported these cases. You don't need the government for anything on that. It would be nice to get the government to come clean about the things they've done with the technology in the background, just to kind of take control, of the populace. But the truth is, when you get around real research around the UFO file, there are a lot of answers that you can get without even having to entertain time travel hypothesis and things. So those things are interesting for sure. And, Thomas Townsend Brown even told us that they're real, but I don't think that you need any kind of particular solution to see what it is. What you do need is to understand that you're dealing with a number of factors. And so, any kind of attempt to paint them with like a demon brush or anything like that, that's where you really get into trouble, because that is just anybody's game, right? And then they could say, oh, well, you believe in UFOs, so you're also a demon, and then you're back to the Middle Ages and witch burnings and stuff. So, obviously they're trying to pull something going on in the Christian communities, as I mentioned, through these Congress people. And I think it's interesting over and over again that we have these right-wing Congress people. And there's nothing wrong with being right-wing, but I'm saying they're using the right-wing part. They're not pitching so hard on the left side. That's the thing to watch for. Professor Scott called it the negative template. What is it they're not doing? And that's how you see what they're up to. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 227. We've gone very deep tonight on alien DNA. Missing scientists. There's more on the missing scientist, the Pascagoula UFO mystery. One of the things that came out about the missing scientist was the body audio cams of the various people who were answering questions in relation to General McCaslin, who went missing on February 27th, and we know was very closely involved with the UFO file. Now, I do want to put this on the record, which is his associate, his assistant, said that she went to dinner with him the night before he went missing, and that they went out to dinner with Space Force. He met with Space Force before he vanished. That's crucial, and that's call for a congressional hearing to investigate what happened to General McCaslin. And when they ask her, all these people who have been trying to push back on the missing scientist story, which is strange, as I pointed out in the beginning, is very self-serving for the people who are doing it. One of the things that came up was they said, is he someone with a high security clearance? And his assistant said, yeah, the highest. And she said, this is the guy who worked with the UFO file. All the stuff that's coming out about UFOs, his name is right in the center of it. So that's his assistant. Okay. So the whole thing about McCasland and his work on the UFO file, this whole fantasy that the mainstream media try to come up with, like, he was feeling sad about getting older and he decided to take off. No, he's part of a pattern of these scientists who work directly in these black projects. There's no question about it. We put it on the record. The emails of him being associated with the Roswell material come directly from the WikiLeaks dump from 2016. We know it. And we don't need, there's no reason for people to throw these things out there like, oh, you're not paying enough attention to depression that people have or whatever. No, you can pay very close attention to people who have depression and understand what the challenges are there. But that doesn't mean when they all start showing up dead that you don't think there isn't a mafia out there that's dealing with the aerospace side on the black projects and saying, I need to get rid of this team. And that's exactly what our research has shown. So keep that in mind as we go forward here, because you're going to see a lot of this weird pushback. And there was a weird pushback thing about Mark McClandish and Amy Eskridge that came out. And I have to tell you, we brought both cases to the fore for a reason. And we've been reporting on McClandish and the things that were going on with him, because he, after all, was part of one of our secret space program conferences. He was the guy who was the digital illustrator for the Air Force for 25 years. And he was the one who saw the secret space program craft and had all the contacts in that world. And he was coming out and presenting this work. And he was nervous about it, but he came through it. And then he turned up dead under very suspicious circumstances in 2021, the same circumstances that Amy Eskridge, who had founded the Institute for Exotic Science, she showed up dead literally a year later after calling out the strangeness of McCandlish's death. You have to follow these types of things in order to get to the bottom of it. And the problem is the mainstream media is so busy, trying to tamp it down. And at first, they were kind of riding with it because it's this organic thing that was out of their hands. Now they're starting to, push back on this. And the Atlantic is saying like, oh no, this is just about depression and everything like that. Well, look, thankfully for people out there, I've studied all sorts of different patterns of things like this. And so when we get to the UFO file part, I can easily detect the pattern that's going on here. They said this when the holistic doctor thing was going on. That was a pattern of eliminating people and eliminating databases. You can go all the way back to the JFK assassination. I have a wonderful quote here on that. But the JFK assassination, yeah. So you have to go back. You have to be aware of your history. And you have to know that there were people who were journalists at the time who tracked the deaths and the mysterious deaths that were around the Warren Commission first, then around the House Assassinations Committee, then around these various things. Even the Assassination Record Review Board in the 90s had its share of all these deaths. But here's one of the things to keep in mind. In the 3-year period which followed the murder of President Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald, 18 material witnesses died, 6 by gunfire, 3 in motor accidents, 2 by suicide, 1 from a cut throat, 1 from a karate chop to the neck, 3 from heart attacks, and 2 from natural causes. An actuary engaged by the London Sunday Times concluded that on November 22nd, 1963, the odds against these witnesses being dead by February 1967, this is the first wave, were 100,000 trillion to 1. Okay? Understand the odds that are involved here and how the media and the groups that are behind these killings will throw out anything to get you off the track and be like, oh yeah, that just happened because, the person was having a bad week. No, these are people who are involved in projects that step on the toes of these other black projects. And if anything, it's just a call for more awareness and more protection for these types of people. But you can't let it go by unnoticed, because in the case of McCaslin, this is a national security crisis. Make no mistake about it. If he was our top person in the UFO file and he got taken out either by the X-Protect group or another group, that's a national security crisis. It has to be investigated. And I think that the Lunas and the Burchetts and the Burlesons, should stop taking selfies on X and get your ass directly to form a new committee to look into the missing scientists. What is the problem? What's the holdup? Where is this committee? You guys love to talk about, that government, they're keeping everything back from us. But we talk to the CIA people and they say everything's okay. Get on the track of putting this together. Come on.
It's all about immediate ego gratification.
Yes.
That would take some work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody knows how to dig their heels in and get to work. That's it. And
they're worried about whose toes they were going to step on too. Because I'll tell you, the list that I would put together for the people who should be investigated around McCaslin are the same people who are pushing the UFO threat. That's how you get to the bottom of that. You open up both things and you'll explode the whole thing. You won't need a JFK commission then, because it'll be very easy to track it all the way back there. Like I said, when you investigate the JFK assassination, you're investigating the UFO file. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. I promised you I would read a report earlier about this nuclear submarine and the weird thing it encountered when it was around Pascagoula and what was going on there. I'm going to read that, and we're going to take your last round of questions. Sound good? Everyone, I want to remind you also, especially if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our free newsletter. It keeps us in touch around this incredible barrage of real heavy-duty censorship that takes place, and it'll let you know about the exciting things we have coming up for you in June, interviews off the charts, things you will not believe that we're going to have available here for you on this show, and all the incredible docuseries pieces that are coming up this summer, including a new episode of Pyramid X as well. Those things are ongoing, and that is part of this mess as well, because I'll tell you, those intelligence agencies, as we've put on the record, are trying to dominate the findings around these things. As things come to the surface, they are being diverted over and over again. That's why you get phonyaliens.gov being about illegal aliens. Let's talk about real aliens here for a moment, shall we? This variety. Do you think we can make that in a lab? What do you think? Think it's possible in 1973 we could have done it? I wonder. It begs the question, shall we? Or is that the real thing being repurposed? Could well be. Or is it just something we're observing and wish we could get in on? Strange objects, maneuvers near nuclear shipbuilding disturb Navy. November 6, 1973. What was the date of Calvin Parker's abduction? October 11th. So this is not even a month later. Pascagoula, Mississippi. As a first step in an apparently highly serious operation to determine the cause and nature of a submerged metallic beam-emitting, disappearing and reappearing, course-changing object seen maneuvering Tuesday evening, November 6th, in the Pascagoula River, the U.S. Navy Friday dispatched to the site of the mystery Lieutenant Commander Craig Dorman of the Naval Coastal Systems Laboratory at Panama City, Florida. These columnists learned Monday that the Navy's concern stems from the proximity of the observation to the Navy's nuclear shipbuilding activities, approximately 200 yards away. In a comprehensive report being written by Dorman to be released next week, the Navy is expected to disclose that it has absolutely no idea what the object is in the Pascagoula River. According to Donahue, with whom we spoke Monday, the Navy was basically caught off guard. The Navy believes the observed object is something totally new and different, totally unknown. We were caught unaware and want to prevent it from happening again. Donahoe said the Navy intends to be ready scientifically for another such sighting and is presently preparing capability in the Pascagoula River area. The basic purpose is to document this story from start to finish, said Donahoe, referring to Lieutenant Commander Dorman's mission. Something in the water is causing that illumination. It remains an unidentified object. We want to maintain a file as a reference for any future sighting. The Navy, he said, is engaged in an objective and scientific approach towards bringing its full activities to bear in the river area. We note that such an approach represents a totally different attitude from that displayed by the Air Force. So the Navy is actually talking to them about UFOs there. The whole problem stemmed from the fact that when we had things going on, ships going by, they could see something glowing down there. And they were like, what is this? So eventually, from the various reports and things I heard about it after the fact, if you dig into it enough, you'll see that they send a submarine down that bumps into this. And eventually, apparently, it's no longer a problem. Do they get rid of it? Does the thing figure out it needs to get out of there? Or does it complete its mission? Is it the same craft, in fact, that picked up Charlie and Calvin? It's pretty damn close, and it's right there. You know, that is the question. Miss Olivia, your final couple of questions.
Well, I could go in a couple different directions here. I do want to hit on this. SV Hargan says, which side was McCasland on? Legacy Aerospace or Tech Bro Military Industrial Complex? Not sure.
Well, you know, he was working at the highest level, the compartmentalized level of the UFO file. So there were various groups that could use him for various things. Obviously, since he was originally drawn in by the phony DeLong thing and all that, he was on the tip of wanting more out there, right? More of the X-share type stuff. But then it kind of became very obvious to him that this is an ex-protect group working and dominating Tom DeLong's work. That's where you get Jim Semivan, Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon. You know, that whole wave of thing is an intel wave. And so these people, you know, come from different ends of the stratosphere. And again, it's not saying even that Lou and Chris and all that are ex-protect. But you see, ex-protect, that's the direction that they would favor, which is the false CIA version of the UFO files, no question about it. But people who are on the X-share side would certainly be more along the lines of a McCasland. What happened is that, look, this is a gift of history. It has to be looked at this way. WikiLeaks was after Hillary Clinton's email because she had just screwed over Bernie Sanders. And they were trying to get it on record so that the Clinton campaign would be hurt by this information. So on a weekly basis, they were releasing her emails. In the middle of the throes of that, they caught this email to her campaign director, John Podesta. It came from DeLong. DeLong starts talking about all the work he's doing with McCasland and how McCasland put together his entire team and how McCasland controls everything at AFRL and Wright-Patterson relating to the Roswell craft. The Roswell craft being the kind of foundation of the whole thing, that they've been working on it for years and years, since 47. So when you get into that, you have to understand what we're dealing with there. You can see McCasland right in the heart of it. And so therefore, I think the best answer for you is he was somebody who had the highest level of knowledge around the UFO file. And when he disappears, when he goes missing, there's no question there are protocols in place where they know how to track him. So to think that he disappeared like that means either the U.S. government was well aware of it and the X-Protect group took care of it, or something happened outside the grasp of the United States government to one of their top UFO file generals, which is a national security crisis. It's one or the other. There is no third way. So this is it's a very, very serious situation. And that's why it needs to be treated, and the entire wave of missing scientists story needs to be treated on that level. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Bo Krills, has DJ heard about the McCasland dementia diagnosis hypothesis that they take them to a retirement home for people who know too much?
Yeah, I have to tell you that McCasland's only 66. And
Well, the wife said that he was experiencing brain fog, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I mean, it was very, she mentioned it was very minor. And there are no indications for, that. No, I think he was taken out. I do. I think he was taken out because of his knowledge of the UFO file. And I think that the telltale is his team gets taken out. Melissa Cassios disappears from Los Alamos. She's dismissed by the Atlantic, who are trying to counter the story I put out. And they said, she's just an administrative assistant. So what? Well, you can be an administrative assistant with a high cosmic clearance at Los Alamos, because they're going to need administrative assistants to hand sensitive information in compartmentalized special access programs between parties. So she's transferring that information. Well, that's part of the team. Where's the other part? Monica Reza. We've done a series of episodes on Monica Reza. Monica Reza, not only was she McCasland's assistant for 5 years, a major NASA engineer, but she also is a person who created a patent out of the UFO file redesign work that they did. That patent is called Mondaloy, as we put out. That is the reimagination, the reinvestigation of the Roswell memory medal. That's how I've tracked it. And so that was standing there ready to revolutionize the way we were doing space flight, because it was heat resistant. Something happened around the ping-ponging of that patent, McCasland's knowledge, and what an administrative assistant passing information back and forth between interested parties was doing. That's the key. That's going to open this whole thing up. I did mention the Peter Thiel thing to you, so I have the post. Peter Thiel moves family to Argentina, they say, to flee high taxes. Can you imagine this billionaire doing that? And potential nuclear war. Yeah. And then he gives a big lecture about, I'm going to tell you what the Antichrist is all about, as I secretly try to bring it about directly through my UFO God idea, the alien God. And I'm going to push that through my little monkey boy there, Jesse Michaels. And I'm going to fund him. And guess what? Just as I move this stuff into Argentina, he's down in South America too. So, one of the things that Thiel did, which I think is interesting, is he studied this program, and he had his people plagiarize aspects of this program. You see, the level that these people operate on, they absorb things with an AI bot. They probably just didn't expect me to point it out in such a graphic fashion. That's a very weird situation. And I have to tell you, when it comes down to it, it's obvious to anyone with a brain that that's what they did with this show, which is they sucked the ideas directly out of the X series and represented them with Peter Thiel's money. So, it's a sick situation that we're in, because that weasel, Thiel, is in the UFO field, and he's preparing the ground for the launch of this alien God thing. And we'll use the Christians, and we'll study the whole thing about the Antichrist. This is some sick stuff. It really is. And, I spend just enough time calling it out so people are aware of it, but it's up to, the entire group of people around this subject not to let the CIA take it over. On one hand, remember, Thiel is close, so close. He's worked with the CIA. How much has he done for the CIA? Palantir is a CIA project. You remember that? So you're just working with the CIA here. And if you don't shake that off, you're really setting up some problems for the future. And the weird way that it works, right now is if the word gets out, it thwarts at least some of their plans. That's the goal. And we can bring a lot of that forward right here. But I will say this, that the way to get to it, because you can put the UFO threat people on the stand and you can subpoena these people and put them in congressionally under oath. That's what you need to do. That's what I would recommend highly. Yes, Miss Olivia.
SB Harkin, Peter Thiel's getting ready to pull the trigger on his multitude of psyops all at once. He needed to be somewhere that won't extradite him. When you destroy a country, you don't hang around for the aftermath. And Luminessa Lux says, I think Argentina's proximity to Antarctica is the key there.
Oh, look, forget it. I mean, how many, the whole thing about Nazi redevelopment and how the bell went to Argentina, you know, how the advanced technology came out of South America. Yeah, you know, that's a pretty good centralized location for somebody like Thiel. But see, it's a weird thing with Thiel because we know through Palantir and through the different things, the negative activities that he's done. I mean, if we had somebody in the UFO field who was funded by George Soros, for example, you know, you would instantly be like, oh, that's Soros's plant. But for some reason, you know, Thiel has all these plants in the UFO field. And, you know, I mean, either you disavow Thiel or, you know, nobody should take the work that you do seriously. And if you're using, you know, Thiel's reach to vacuum up, hoover up the ideas in the independent community to try to feed them back, and you're doing it for purposes of aerospace and the different investments in aerospace and the control of people for religious ideas about, you know, alien gods and things. I mean, this is a sick thing that Thiel is doing, and it's got to be cut and dry. When you're doing real UFO research, you cannot work with people who are subordinate to Peter Thiel. I mean, you know, you won't get the truth from CIA people, and you won't get the truth from counterintelligence people. It's just so obvious. And yet over and over again, you see it. And, you know, I've put it out there, and I will, you know, even as a lone outpost, as I've said, I will put it out there. It's going to be front and center no matter what, because you cannot have that kind of activity going on in this field, because it's not independent media. You know, it is co-opted, you know, CIA junk. That's the whole point. The whole purpose is to make sure the public doesn't get that. And people who aren't aware of the UFO file, who have nowhere near the level of knowledge that we do in the ideas room and on this show, when those people in the public just picking up, you know, a glimpse of a website or a news story, you know, there's a reason why Obama is visiting the set of Steven Spielberg's movie Disclosure, coming out on June 12th. And so there's going to be a lot of tussling going on over the summer, and there's a lot of battles in the background going on. My guess, as I started the show off with, and it's unfortunate, it seems like the Trump administration is sort of losing their bid to move that power of the UFO file back under the executive branch. They've made some pretty interesting attempts, though, even Space Force, some of the transparency attempts of releasing the records. So I think that, you know, in theory, they had a good idea there, but it doesn't seem to be working. It appears that the president is not capable of pulling back what the intelligence services are holding back. So you have that clash right in the heart going on there. Miss Olivia.
It seems like we're fully corrupted at this point.
Unfortunately, I mean, you know, I liked some things that Trump was doing around the UFO file, no question. But it's, you know, with the whole thing like aliens.gov and all that, it's not, look, I mean, that's really, you know, that's like giving up, isn't it? That's like, we'll take the idea of releasing this stuff, but we won't actually do it. And then we'll make a joke about our own immigration policy. I don't know. Is that just bad PR, or is it how I suspect? That's the question. I don't know. But I will say, I think it was bad. It's a bad look. Yeah.
I have to make sure I throw this in here, although it's a little tangential. Najat says, here's a thought. What happens to all the sperm, eggs, and fertilized eggs that are in cryobanks? If they are not used, what happens to them?
Well, yeah. Well, it's
This is really, because
yeah.
they're supposedly destroyed, right?
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you're going through like in vitro and everything,
Yes.
and but who's to say where they go? What happens
No
to them?
question. Everything, I'm sure, is repurposed down to a dental visit to something really hardcore like what you're talking about. And I think it's a good question. The thing is that this comes up in terms of all kinds of reproductive questions and things around abortion and all the rest of it. What they do and how the repurposing for industry that goes on with these things and what they've designed with human fetal tissue and things like that. There's going to come a time, in my opinion, where they try to integrate that with what they're doing with the whole robot aspect. And you're going to have this idea of, hey, well, it's only a clone, it's it's only a cyborg. Don't worry about it. And it's even better if it has human cells. And here's why. Here's the sales pitch. So, one of the things that needs to go on in the 21st century is to create a whole new ethical red line. And unfortunately, what's taking place instead is a scientific dictatorship. That's what we're moving into. So these things need to be looked at from a series of levels. There are ways to thwart it. And a lot of it starts with potent journalism around the subject matter in question. That's what we're talking about right here with it. And I wanted to mention that there's a scientist who went missing actually in 2023 named Ingrid Lane. And what I noticed as I was studying the Pascagoula case was something similar that went on here, which was that she was last seen October 15th in New Mexico, Jemez Springs, 11 miles north of Highway 26. Her black Subaru hatchback was found broken down and abandoned at the same location with a broken rear window. Remember, I was talking about Calvin Parker and his broken windows. Ingrid was last seen wearing a gray fleece jacket, black jogger pants, and a gray knit hat. She was trying to day hike a nearby mountain. I'm going to get into this story in the next episode, but I wanted to make us aware of what was going on with this story, because one of the strange factors involved in her story is that they came up with a cover story that a boulder had come down and that had caused the damage to the back of the car. But anyone from law enforcement who's made commentary on the case says it's very implausible. So you have to wonder why that cover story was even invented. But she did the same thing of leaving her devices behind and wandering off onto the trail. And, I think the pattern showing up over and over again, we've focused in on, say, about a dozen of these scientists. But I think there are other cases that are related to it. And there does seem to be this location factor going on in relation to New Mexico, Huntsville, and then on the coast. So that's how the dots have been connecting very much. We'll have more on the story of Ingrid Lane next week for you as well. And there's going to be more going on in relation to the missing scientists for some new information that has come forward on it that I'll be able to work through during the rest of the week. Miss Olivia, your last question of the evening.
Okay, the last question is from Finstereric. What if the real secret is they look just like us and are already running things?
Yeah, well, look, remember Valiant Thor, the story of Valiant Thor? they could have been telling us something there, which is when we got into nuclear trouble and it looked like we were an inch away from blowing the planet up, that they just threw caution to the wind and rolled out their best disguises, human disguises, and interacted with us, telling us, you don't want to go down this road. And I think some of that stuff did happen. I think it happened during the Eisenhower administration.
Well, I mean, we already know about the CIA masks, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's gone mainstream.
Yes. Excellent point.
So, but they could have used them back then. Do they actually look like us, or do they seem to look like us? And I just wanted to mention Bob Dean.
Yes.
He talked about the 4 types of aliens that they knew were here from, what was it, in the 50s?
Oh, yeah. Well, he talked about more than 4. Yes.
Well, there were 4. This is in that, the papers that were
1960s. Yeah.
Okay. And one of the groups looked exactly like us, and they were gossiping about whether they were in government positions.
Yeah.
Back then.
Yeah. No question about it. There's been this hint that we're side by side with something else. And I think you're going to see more coming to the front about this over time. I also think that, there was a lot of misdirection in the last week with this whole 23andMe story and misusing it, shall we say, sensationalizing it. But you can see what's happening is some of the deeper stories are coming out and they need to co-opt them. So that does mean in a lot of ways that they're nervous about the public learning certain types of things. And so they need to have their own version of it. And, I think when we get to a case like Pascagoula, which one, we have excellent witnesses for. 2, the people involved are very solid citizens with a long track record of talking about the story. And 3, the unusualness of the entire case, and then the presence of a conglomerate that dealt with black military projects, was very close to political power and engaged in all sorts of chicanery. I think that the Pascagoula case is one of the strongest cases for some sort of human alien interaction around the event, causing the event. And at least that there would be, an operation where Litton was observing what was taking place. But the people in question, the way that they sized it up in their own lives was that this was something from another place. And so they had dealt with the beings. So you see, on a certain level, they have the advantage over us because they were looking face to face with this other thing. So you can see, in a way, like we take a certain amount of clarity from their impressions, just like with Betty Hill, and she said, oh no, what I saw didn't look anything like the Greys. They were like people, just a little bit different. So who were they if they weren't the Greys? And then when Calvin Parker, years later, after the events, looked at things like the Greys, he said, well, what I encountered wasn't anything like that. I saw one human woman and those 3 weird monster shriveled up things, and so there's a lot to work with in cases like that. I think the more we look at cases with that kind of foundation, the deeper we'll get into all of it. And with that, Miss Olivia, we are done. I will have your super chats.
I am booped. All right, let me get back to the beginning here. All right, so J.M. Parsons, Bricklayer's Daughter, Bill Hicks, Daniel Consago, Tim Houston, Jeff Fletcher, Thomas M., Emerald Gunrunner, Thomas Ball, Ray Story, Harry Zeri, Grace Vibration, Mermaid Moxie, Blazin' River, Helena Wilcox, DTM 190, Alarmanine Bay, Eurythmia's Fun, Empire of the Light, Zazafraz, the Buddhas of Boston Sports, Professor Hamamoto, and Robert Scott. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Wow, incredible. We really appreciate it. And I have to say, I mean, to all our supporters and subscribers, thank you, because we couldn't do what we do without you. And it feels like that synergy between the work that we're doing here and the ideas room is going higher and higher every show now. It's like we're entering into this kind of peak period. And I think the summer holds a great deal for the kind of struggle for the truth in the middle of all this. We will see you all. I'll do actually some shout outs before we go. Let's see here. We've got Bill Hicks sent a super chat. Interesting. Inner Alchemy. Yes. Corky Goss. Corky. Got it. Olivia did a good job. A grand job. Yes. It's more like it. Nicely done, Miss Olivia. DJ going old school and going deep, deep into the night and early morning. Indeed. Indeed. The midnight hour has struck, in fact. Know your origins. Yes. Don't let the CIA tell you jack about the UFO file. Forget about all that. CIA's discredited organization. That's all there is to it. Great show. Valiant Thor. What did President Kennedy say? I want to take the Central Intelligence Agency, smash it into 1,000 pieces, and scatter it to the wind. That's what they should have done then. And we got a second chance here. Have a great night, X-Fam. Thank you, Najat. Let's see who else we got there. Go out, Marlene, Roger, Fernfolk, everyone. Let's see. Maybe that's his way of letting us know. Yes, there's more disclosure in here than in the government. I couldn't agree with you more. Luminous Lux. Indeed. Love y'all. Scientific Mystic. There we go. Fantastic. What a great ideas from tonight. That thing about crystals, we can grow crystals internally. The thing about Pascagoula thing with Charlie and the crystal, I think is very interesting track. Very, very interesting track. Dark Journalist, great show tonight. The momentum is building. Blazing River, I couldn't agree with you more. Indeed it is. And you can feel that. Fantastic questions, too, and the ideas from tonight. Just off the charts. I know Kate's out there. Great to see you. And we have some exciting interviews coming up. Gigi Young is coming up as well. And her work is more timely than ever. Just incredible. JFK, Fred Fire Dulles, indeed. And the conversation went something like, if this was the UK, I'd have to go, but this is the United States of America, and you have to go. He understood. He'd lived in both places. He understood both. Good night, folks. Can't wait for the next Pyramid X. It's coming your way, Bo Krells, let me tell you. Wow, just fantastic tonight. And, of course, I have to say that particular abduction, just, mind-blowing. And Calvin Parker, the honesty of these guys, the earnestness, and the lack of the kind of false whistleblower junk that we see now. We need that integrity back in the field. And I think with the potency we deliver here, we can see that, we can see a whole return to that, and it would be a completely new and better era for the whole thing. So we will see you all next week, and it says end broadcast, but after all,
never really ends.
Never really ends. And never let it be forgot. Once there was a Camelot, and there can be again, just a matter of lining up the times with the right people and the right potency. And that's what we're doing here. We'll see you all next week.
God bless everybody.
And have a good night, everyone.